The mistress who gave herself to the scheming Earl John, a lecherous woman having fun with her younger brother. All these sordid stories are about one girl named Catherine Orleans, and they're all just false rumors. It's been 10 years since her stepmother Lola became the wife of the Viscount of Orleans. Open discrimination and a cold attitude. Stepmother, together with Anne, her daughter by the Viscount, tormented Catherine relentlessly, giving her no peace. She treated Catherine very badly. "How dare you raise your head, Belly? Go to your room and don't even think about showing your face," she said in every situation. At first, Viscount Orleans tried to come between them, but then he too began to regard Catherine as a mere nuisance. But Catherine herself wanted little. She didn't need as many things as Anne did, nor did she need lavish jewelry. She didn't care that the stories in the bedroom were tattered, and the heels were so worn that the shoes were different heights. But she had her limits too. For her dead mother's sake, she gritted her teeth and put up with it for 2 years. But now she didn't see the need for it anymore, because Catherine was done. It was deadly annoying, and she wasn't going to take it anymore. One day, Catherine's stepmother, namely Lola Orleans, called her in and started yelling and saying that their family didn't need such a daughter. At that moment, the girl thought that there was nothing surprising about it, and it happened all the time. Catherine pushed back her chair and sat down on it. Lola began to tell her that the eldest daughter had no manners at all, because the guests were standing and she was the first to sit down. The stepmother then asked if that was what she had taught her. At this point, Catherine thought she hadn't learned anything, because she'd rather call a passing bug her homeroom teacher than her stepmother. Besides, she did not realize what kind of guests they were. In front of her stands only a miserable person, namely Catherine's fiancé, a man named Miss Charlotte Kilhold. After a little silence, Catherine asked, "What does she want from her and why is she pestering her?" The stepmother, pretending that she had already said she didn't need such a daughter in their family, asked if she had any hearing problems. But Catherine let this insulting remark pass her ears and asked her, "So you mean to tell me to get out of here?" But then suddenly another girl came running into the room. She shouted to her sister and told her never to say that. This girl was Lola's daughter by Viscount Orleans, and Charlotte's mistress. Her name was Anne Orleans. The girl said that all these rumors couldn't be true, and she believed Charlotte. The man asked Anne not to cry because her tears were not worth all this. The girl said that when she thinks about how her sister is suffering, tears come to her eyes. While Catherine watched all this, she thought it was clear as day that it was Anne who had started all these rumors. Not to mention that right now, these two are openly hugging right in front of her. When the stepmother saw this picture, she said that her daughter had such a tender heart, it touched her, and then suddenly she heard Catherine's voice. The girl said that so-and-so would leave. The stepmother began to ask why she had suddenly decided to go. But the girl interrupted her at once and said, "Was it suddenly you yourself who just said that I must go away?" Lola replied to her that did she really think it would only be enough for her to simply disown the family to dispel the foul rumors. At this point, the stepmother made such an evil face with a smirk that the girl thought she could at least try not to make such an expression. Thinking about it, Catherine asked her, then suggesting that she kill herself right now, and here. Without waiting for an answer, she turned to Charles and asked if he agreed. If she did so, a part of the House of Orleans, its dignity, would be restored if she hanged herself right now. As he continued to hug Anne, he started to say that he didn't think things were quite right. But the girl immediately interrupted him. The girl went up to her sister and asked her not to say so, that she would leave them, because it was all her fault, and let her rather blame it all on Anne. At that moment, Catherine thought how sick she was of it all. Her noisy stepmother, her stupid fiancé, and her hypocritical younger sister. After all this time, Catherine has become completely disillusioned with all these people. That's why it won't be hard for her to leave this house. The girl pulled her sister's hand out and said that she understood that silence was a sign of agreement, so she decided that she was going to go pack her things. As the girl left, Anne shouted after her from behind. At that moment, Catherine thought that she was acting as a loving sister to the last, and it was worthy of respect. As Catherine packed her things, she noticed that she had only filled one suitcase. She had already started to leave. Suddenly her stepmother runs up to her and starts asking her what she's doing. How dare she steal the family's valuables, and even called her a lousy girl. Catherine said that if they're chasing her away anyway, so why can't they at least let her leave in comfort? Lola got even more pissed off and asked, "What is it with her today, because that's all she does? That's how it is all day long, bickering." The girl replied to her that she heard her and let her shut up already. At that moment, Catherine thought she was defying her stepmother for the first time in her life. But if she had known it was so easy to express her emotions, she would have done it much sooner. When the girl went outside, her fiancé and sister were already standing there. Anne screamed, saying that she couldn't really leave them. She then turned to Charles and told him to answer her something. But Catherine went up to the man and slapped him on the cheek. When Anne asked the girl what she was doing, Catherine hit her. That's why there are already 2 on the ground, and Catherine said as she walked away that they could consider themselves to have gotten off lightly. After that, she stopped and said that she had forgotten to tell them something. She asked him to tell the boy that if he wanted a quiet life, he should not look for it. Then she would not do anything to him. At the end, she said, "Let's just part ways peacefully for eternity, and that's it." When she stepped outside the gate, she thought it was perfect. The sunlight was like a divine blessing to her. He's so bright and flawless. At that moment, she wondered if she had felt more free in the past few days. Everything was perfect. As she got into the wagon, she thought that the first thing she needed to do was to leave her home. But now it was time for her to decide where exactly she was going to go. When the carriage pulled up to her, the coachman asked where to take her. Catherine answered him that it was beyond the Viscount Orleans lands to begin with. After that, she pulled out her map and looked at the fact that, judging by it, her father didn't really have that much land. And yet all this time she had been living on that piece of land and couldn't even breathe easy. The girl sighed and thought, "I'm sorry, Mother, but I've been patient for several years as it is. Now it's time to find my own way." As her musings were interrupted by a man and asked her if she had decided where they were going. The girl said she had just figured it out. The most prosperous region in the east of the empire. "Take me to Christopher County," Catherine said. That's where she would begin her new life. After a while the cart stopped and the man said that they were already there. After that they got out of the cart. They stopped next to a large and beautiful house. When Catherine looked at it, she was enchanted, and the coachman said the house was for sale. So it's exactly what she was looking for. Catherine chose Earl Christopher's domain as her new home for one simple reason. Not only were these lands renowned for their high level of economic, cultural, and artistic development, but they were also under the patronage of the famous wizard, Grand Duke Cesare. All in all, the city was extremely lively. But the mere fact that Catherine had to leave the Viscount of Orleans land cost her a lot of money and time. The change of destination on the road also cost her a lot of money. Because Catherine decided to leave Liana's Roeder and take her mother's maiden name, Fanny, she was unable to use the bank account recorded in her old name. The only thing that saved her was the fact that the coachman was in her position, so that the danger was averted. It had been nearly 15 days since Catherine, who had been searching for lodgings, had stayed at the inn. And now, after all these days, the good news finally came to her. She was still lucky enough to find a suitable house for sale on the outskirts of town. This old mansion she's visiting now is exactly that. When the girl scrutinized the house from the outside, she said that for that price it was just huge. The coachman said she was quite right. This is the largest residential building in the northern part of the city. There are 2 other buildings almost as large as the main building. She couldn't find another lot like that anywhere else in Christopher at that price. After looking at the agreement, the girl turned around and moved closer to the rock, saying that the view was also amazing. And the view was indeed marvelous. From that mountain, the whole town was visible. "Well said," added the coachman. "And from there to the harbor is very near. So it's a great place to admire the sea." But Catherine interrupted him. She was troubled by the question, why was the house so cheap if it was so lovely? The coachman stammered and said that she was just lucky. Nowhere else on the continent could she find a second house like this, so she was very lucky. At that moment, Catherine thought that it was still very strange. It couldn't be a mansion like this for such a small price. After a while the coachman asked, so she thought. Sure, the house had been empty and a bit neglected for a long time, but nothing was falling off anywhere. Catherine then asked what the problem was. Why is the house so cheap if it has all the perks? The coachman said there was no problem, she was just lucky, that's all. The girl interrupted him and said then she was leaving. Alia said that the house looked lovely, had a big garden and a great location. In general, she liked it, but apparently the mansion has serious flaws that could overwhelm its virtues. That's why she said she wouldn't enter into a contract. She also said that she no longer trusted him, so she would no longer need his services. The coachman tried to calm her down and bring her back, but the girl didn't listen to him and started to walk away. She thought that she knew it. She was asking too much in her position, so she would have to look for a house nearby and much more modest. Well, then suddenly the coachman ran up to her and told her to stop and not to go away because he was guilty before her. The man stopped, resting, and said he would explain everything to her. Catherine stopped and waited patiently for him. A few minutes, the coachman said that they actually say that a ghost appears in this mansion and it lives in the basement. On full moons, screams are heard from there, and some say they even hear women's laughter. Juan said he can't state how accurate this information is, but in the last 2 years as many as 4 tenants have moved out of there. But the girl interrupted him and said that she was ready to sign the contract. She took a piece of paper and began to sign it, saying that such a house would suit her just fine. She would be lonely without friends anyway. You're not going to get bored. She's not going to get bored in this house because there's a lot to do. So she said it was just perfect for her. After that, she handed over the deed. It was nearing evening when she got there and started cleaning. The house was very dirty. The girl, of course, was glad that she had found it, but there was a lot of dust and dirt. That's a lot of rooms. But for some distraction and respite, she went to the window. When she opened it, the fresh evening air blew into the house. She was looking at the most beautiful view of the evening city. After admiring it for a bit, she told herself that everything was fine. And don't let her worry so much, because compared to before, she was just in paradise now. Then she turned back and saw that it was very dark in the house, and she thought it might be better to light candles all over the house, because the electricity might not be fixed soon. She thought it would be a good idea, and wondered where they kept all sorts of not-so-needed things like candles in their house. When she looked down the stairs, she remembered Kutcher's words that a ghost appears and it lives in the basement. The girl told herself that she hoped everything would be all right and started down the stairs. When she was at the very bottom, she saw a light at the entrance to the basement and was very surprised by it, because even in normal rooms there is no light. When the girl opened the door and stepped inside, she saw strange drawings on the floor that glowed with a bright red light. She was amazed to see this unusual sight. Then suddenly from behind her she heard, "Whose voice is that? The one who possesses me will rule the world." The girl paid no attention to these words. She ran to get a mop and thought that someone had drawn paint all over the floor. She started trying to scrub the paint off and wondered who would have thought to paint all this. If they were going to use the basement, at least let them keep it clean. That was okay. She would try to get it all off. Suddenly a man approached her from behind and asked who she was. When the girl didn't answer, he came even closer, presented a gun to her throat and said, "I asked who you are." The man continued, "What are you? A chain dog of the Holy See? Have you managed to get here already?" The girl had only one thing on her mind. She didn't realize who this man was. The stranger said it was praiseworthy. But Catherine began to scrutinize his appearance. He had almond-shaped violet eyes, white skin like marble, a face of extraterrestrial beauty. The girl speculated that it might be the previous master of the house. The stranger continued to talk. He said his outfit was very believable. He said she was like the most normal city girl and he almost bought it. The girl started to slowly back away from him. The man said they were getting farther and farther away every day. At that moment, Catherine thought she'd had enough, so she punched him in the chest and shouted, "Paul!" The man didn't understand what she meant. Then Catherine backed off and said that she didn't understand a word he was saying, so she'd better let him start by scrubbing the floor. She said that she had been cleaning the place in her sweat and he had come and trampled on it. She also told him not to swing his sword. Not only did he break into someone else's house, but he wants her to report him for attempted murder. And he wants her to report him for attempted murder. The guy didn't know what to say. He certainly wasn't expecting that kind of reaction. After a bit of silence, he moved closer to her and told her it wasn't even funny, and asked if she thought it was time to stop pretending like she didn't know anything. After that, he moved away from her and said that he was in a great mood today. So if she would tell him everything, he would spare her. At that moment, Catherine remembered her mother telling her back when she was very young, "Never go in with strange wizards." Got it, my favorite Catherine. If you want to live together with your mother happily ever after forever, remember my words. Catherine thought at that moment that she would always remember her mother's admonition. And this man is definitely a wizard, so she's not going to deny what her mother said. The man asked Catherine, "Why and what is she here for?" The girl didn't answer anything, but thought that she hadn't even expected to meet a mage in such a wilderness. She realized that she could not let him know that she was afraid. So she said that she didn't know what he was imagining, but she's here to scrub that awful drawing off the floor, and unlike him, she's not in the mood. So come on. You're not going to shake your rights in someone else's house, and either you get out of here or you start cleaning up, Catherine told him. When I don't get introduced, hearing this, he was very surprised that she said in someone else's house. So the girl pulled a deed from her pocket and said that this paper confirmed that she was Catherine Fawny, the new owner of this mansion, and the earth, the addition, and all that is beneath and above them belong to her alone. So to trespass on my property like that and then threaten me is ridiculous, Catherine told him as he read the contract. After he finished, she took the piece of paper from him and told him that if he was tight on his ears, she could repeat everything slower. After a brief silence, the man said, "So you bought this house along with the land?" The girl confirmed his words. The man then said that if it turns out that she is the new owner of the place, then let her start by letting her apologize to him. But Catherine didn't listen to him very attentively because he looked familiar. She knew that such a man was worth seeing once, and she would never forget him. But she didn't remember where she knew him from. But the stranger asked that she tie up her blouse, from which she had quite recently retrieved the contract, and turned away from her. The girl said she thought he could get out of there faster than she could tie the braid, and she thought to herself that for a man who broke into a stranger's house uninvited, he was behaving like a gentleman. Then the guy decided to leave, but Catherine pulled him by the sleeve and told him to wait. After that, she explained that she didn't have candles and asked him if he could leave this flower that was next to her here. And things had been pretty quiet since that day. She was most concerned about the magic circle in the basement, but at some point it stopped burning and seemed to turn off. So she was able to focus on cleaning. The mansion was really huge, so it took her a few days just to clean it all up. But she was enjoying her long-awaited freedom. She could do what she really wanted to do, and in the mornings she sat quietly and drank tea. As she thought, living alone was just fine, and she was glad she had decided to leave that house. It was all good until this man moved in with her. The man asked if she heard any strange or scary noises at night. Catherine replied that she did not hear anything like that. Then he asked, could it be that the house is shaking for some inexplicable reason? She replied that it wasn't. He asked what about the nightmares. The girl replied that she had no such dreams. It's worth explaining what happened. Just as the water was boiling and she was about to enjoy a cup of tea, the man suddenly appeared. To her questions about when, where he came from, and why, he didn't answer and just sat down at her table defiantly. After that, he started asking all sorts of strange questions. After these questions, he apologized for pushing her around like that, and asked if she wanted to look for another house. Catherine replied that there was no way she wanted to change it. Then the stranger suggested that maybe it was hard for her to talk to other people. Well, the girl said she's talking to him, so she was fine in that respect. At that moment, Catherine thought that she was not really going to answer so one-syllable to his questions, but she didn't know what to do, because she really hadn't heard anything strange, and she wasn't having nightmares. "Put the cup of tea down," she said, as she recalled the real estate agent telling her about the strange noises too. At this point, the man asked, and she still, hearing even that, had decided to buy the mansion. Catherine replied that yes, and it was no problem at all for her. At that moment, the girl wondered why she was so obedient in answering all his questions. Maybe she was so mesmerized by his face. The man now looked extremely elegant, as if he were an aristocrat from some noble family, and he did not remind her of the tramp he had been when they first met. He also had a completely different eye color. Catherine supposed maybe it was the darkness of the basement that made her think she saw purple. Catherine didn't understand why she was so uncomfortable meeting his gaze, and she assumed that most likely she just imagined it in the dark. "Think it over," Catherine said. If she had answered all his questions, could he please leave her? Otherwise, I'll really have to report him for trespassing. But the man did not answer her. He continued to sit in his chair. Then Catherine jumped up and asked him what he was thinking about, and whether he was going to leave or not. Started to get up from the table and said then they were done for the day. Catherine said, "Since when does he decide?" She wouldn't do anything now. She said to let him know that next time she would indeed file a report on him. He seemed to ignore her words and started pulling something out of his pocket. Said something else. After that, he put the money on the table and said it was for her for tea. When Catherine heard this, she was very much surprised. But then suddenly the door slammed shut and she screamed, asking herself what it was all for. When he left, the girl thought, in big cities, do all men behave like this? What if they came out with a handsome face, so can they behave like shameless men? But she decided not to think about it anymore and to see how much city men paid for tea these days. So she picked up a bill that was lying on the table. When she unwrapped the bill, she was surprised, because it was 100 leads. With that amount of money, you could keep 6 servants for a month. She wondered even more, who was he that was throwing around so much money? 5 days had passed since she was left with 100 leads for tea. She realized that it was time to do grocery shopping, so she went to the bazaar. She'd already picked up a small selection of groceries, so she went and checked everything off the list. She seemed to have everything she needed for the soup. As she approached the alley, she saw that there were a lot of people near the bulletin board, and she wondered why that was so. She thought that maybe it was because the emperor had died, so she decided to go over to the board and read what it was about. It said that Archduke Khizar, after 2 years of wandering, had finally finished his journey and fulfilled the emperor's order. When Catherine read it, she didn't understand why there were so many people. It wasn't very interesting after all. But when she looked at the picture, she realized it was the same man who had come to her and given her 100 leads. When she looked more closely, she realized that they were a little different. The Archduke was handsome, of course, but the man who'd broken into her house was no match for him. His gaze was cold, and he looked darker, with his mouth closed. But then suddenly a man came up to the girl from behind and, laughing, said that she spoke as if she had seen his lordship in person. When the girl turned around, the man continued, "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Mel Fabrice, head of security for the northern part of the city." She gave her name and said that she was glad to make his acquaintance. She then added that she was not well acquainted with capital politics, so she asked what order the Archduke had received. The man told her back that he had to deal with the horrible dragon everyone calls Corsolopus. Catherine had heard of him, and asked Mel if he was referring to that Corsolap that farmed the mountains in the south of the empire. The man said that his lordship is the greatest wizard and only he can rival the emperor. So whatever the glory of this dragon, the Archduke, he is no match for. It is because of him that the people of Christopher can sleep easy. The terrible dragon Corsolop has burned down a small kingdom on the southern borders of the empire and made it his domain. So Cesare is such a powerful wizard that he was able to kill a monster like that alone? The girl thought in surprise. And he's a magician, so he's definitely the man she saw. So she was trying to get the Archduke himself to mop the floor. Yes, if she knew, she would bitch and not say anything to him. Well, then suddenly their awkward silence was interrupted by a man who said that he had heard that she was the new owner of the mansion on the hill. He also said that if she needed help, she could come to him any time. When the girl returned home, the sun was already setting. She went out into the yard to feed the little red kitten. When she put his feeder on the ground, she thought that she had to tidy up the garden afterwards. She hadn't even finished cleaning it yet. She wondered if she would be kicked out of town for this. I thought that, judging by how quiet it had been the last few days, things might have settled down, especially since the Grand Duke must have more important things to do. When the cat had finished his food, she petted him and said, "Good for you, Meow. You don't have to worry about money or housing. You don't have to. You live in peace." But then suddenly her voice was interrupted by a loud explosion coming from her house. Everyone was very frightened. Catherine turned around to see what it was, but she noticed that her house now had a big hole in it. She thought maybe she was dreaming about all this now, but then all of a sudden she saw some huge monster and that man in the house. She recognized him. This monster said he would very carefully peel off his muscles layer by layer and eat them, enjoying watching him squirm in agony. He said that he might not even think of running away with his tail between his legs, but his opponent wasn't even going to retreat. So they got into a fight. When it was over, Catherine went into the house and approached the man. She asked what he was doing in her house and what kind of strange monster it was. The man was surprised to hear her say it was a monster. The girl pointed him at the dead monster and told him that goat head and what he was doing here. Said it was nothing special and said she should calm down a bit first. The girl asked if he's mocking her now because she's cleaning like hell, and he's tearing her half the house down and asking her to calm down. She said this. Then the part of the house that had recently been destroyed appeared behind him. The girl was surprised to see all this. She assumed he'd done it all with magic. But then, suddenly he spoke up and said that he'd said it was no big deal. And as she could see, the house she'd been cleaning like hell was in perfect order. Catherine thought that only one person in the county could possess such strong magic. So she asked him, "You are Archduke Cesare, right?" She wondered what he would say. She supposed he might say, "Yes, that's right. It's me, the master of this land, Archduke Cesare." He won't deny it, she thought. But when he spoke, the girl was surprised because he said it wasn't him, and he was confused with him often enough. At that moment, she thought he was lying, for he looked exactly like Archduke Cesare from the poster in the square. She could not believe that he would think she would believe him so easily. But one thing was clear to her for sure. It was that no good could come from dealing with this man. So she went to the bookcase and took out a book containing the money he had given her. She gave it to him and told him to take his money and not to come back. The man was very surprised and asked if she still wished to stay in that house after what she had recently seen. He would advise her to use the money to find a new home. Catherine apologized and said that she had no intention of leaving that mansion. Besides, she'd warned him days ago if it happened again, but she didn't have time to finish. He immediately grabbed her hand, which still contained the money, and asked her if she was afraid. If she died, she wouldn't be able to write a statement. She wouldn't even be able to open her mouth. Strong wizards from birth are distinguished by a special eye color. And the most dangerous of them, of course, is violet. Other colors can be not so afraid. We owners of violet eyes should be on guard, as Catherine always told her mother. Then it didn't seem like it the first time she met him, and she finally did realize who he was. He suddenly broke through her thoughts, saying that he wasn't forcing her to do it, but that she had seen it all for herself. Terrifying, inhuman-looking monsters get their hands on this mansion, or rather the land on which it was built. It is with words that he is only trying to say that at any moment today's incident could happen again. So he put more money in her hands and said it was for her own good. Next time she might lose not just her home, but her own life. So he told her to think it over. After saying that, he suddenly disappeared, leaving behind only 1,000 lins. Apparently he wanted her to stop annoying him and just leave while she had the chance. Now that she recognized the man's true identity, she became afraid that if she continued to resist further, she could face some rather unfortunate consequences. Now she realized that it was finally time for her to leave. She could find a better home very quickly anyway. As Catherine was going through the books she wanted to take with her, she saw some picture on the shelf. When she looked at it, she knew it was her mother. She was everything to Catherine. The time they spent together with her mother was the most beautiful period of her life. It seemed to her then that the whole world lay at her feet, and she was not afraid of anything at all. 10 years before, her mother had gone missing. In the intervening years, the girl has always wondered why she left her behind, an infinite number of times. Even though she didn't hold a grudge against her mom, she still missed her madly. After all, her mom was the dearest person to her. The portrait was in such good condition, as if it had been done quite recently. Momentarily, she thought that she knew her mom was still alive, but she didn't understand where in the mansion the portrait had come from. Even when she settled in Christopher after all the misadventures, she still felt a longing for her mother. Could what she found in her portrait in this house be just a coincidence? Perhaps somewhere she can find other clues that will eventually lead her to her mother. That man had it right. If it happens again, she may indeed be in danger, and then it is not a fact that she can save herself. Still, now that she had found her mother's picture, she would not back down so easily, and would never leave this house until she knew what had happened to her mother. Over the next 4 days, a lot of things managed to happen. Together with Roz, they searched the entire house for clues that might find Catherine's mom. Catherine decided to hire a maid named Roz. Thanks to her, they found so many things in the mansion. As befitted an old house, the interior was full of hidden spaces and obscure objects. It was obvious that the previous owner of the mansion had been into some very unusual things. That's what Catherine would have thought if she hadn't seen a giant monster in the house earlier. One evening, as Catherine sat by the fireplace reading a book, there was a knock at her door. It was her maid, who asked if her mistress was asleep. The girl was very surprised because she didn't realize what Roz was doing at such a late hour. Catherine went to the door and opened it, asking the maid what was wrong. Roz looked very frightened. The maid apologized to her mistress for disturbing her, and asked if she could stay with her for a short time. Catherine, of course, allowed her to enter, and herself thought that the girl was shivering so much that she was overcome with pity, and she suggested that the maid might have had a nightmare. Catherine asked her if she could get her something to drink to calm down, but Roz grabbed her arm and told her not to go there, because it was dangerous and there was someone in the mansion. Catherine didn't believe her, and said it couldn't be. The maid said she had heard strange noises from the hall during the night. Roz explained that first there seemed to be a woman's laughter, then the sounds of children's feet and a string quartet playing. They torment her every night and she has lost all sleep. At that moment, Catherine remembered the man's words about nightmares and strange sounds. She thought he'd made it all up. As the girl sat the maid down on the couch, she said she needed to check something and asked Roz to stay here and try not to worry. When Roz wanted to object, Catherine said that it was her house and no one would go in there without her permission. After that, she left the room and closed the door. Roz tried to stop her, but it was no use. At that moment, Catherine thought she must hurry, for the maid had said that she heard strange noises only at night. If she didn't get there before sunrise, she wouldn't know anything. She still has to live in this house, so she can't turn a blind eye to everything that's going on. Until she finds out what this house has to do with her mother, she will hold on to it until the end. With these thoughts, Catherine walked down the dark corridors and thought it was very quiet, and she could hear nothing but the sound of the rain. She decided to start by checking the basement. Suddenly, as she passed the window, she saw the same man in it. He was just standing there in the rain. Catherine didn't understand what he was doing there in such a heavy rain, so she ran to him and asked him what he was doing in her house again. When she touched him, he immediately fell to the ground. When Catherine wanted to ask what had happened to him, she felt his face and noticed that he was very cold, like ice. The girl realized that if he didn't get help now, it could end badly, so she decided to act. After a while, she still managed to bring the stranger into the room and put him next to the fireplace. The room was damp at first, but thankfully it warmed up. Catherine barely remembered how she'd gotten him into the house. It was as if she had gained superpowers. The man was very large and heavy. Catherine walked over to the stranger and covered him with a blanket to keep him warm. She hoped he should feel better now. The girl realized he wasn't human, but she couldn't understand why he was standing in the middle of such a heavy rain like he was going to die. But then suddenly Catherine began to hear voices. They were telling her to leave him and not to fulfill his wish. Voices everywhere parasitized anything dark and gloomy. Apparently the mansion was no exception. They were darker than shadows and nastier than dirt. They reeked of rotten water. These voices, appearing from her childhood, tried to ruin the whole mood. The voices kept urging her to leave him and promised to fulfill her every wish. Catherine got to her feet and said that it was getting too noisy. She asked them to shut their mouths and leave her alone. She began to threaten them, saying that if they twitched, she would make sure their spirit never stayed in that house again. She was surprised, as they didn't understand why they couldn't convince her to leave it. After that, the voices disappeared into the darkness, and Catherine was able to exhale quietly. She hadn't realized they existed until then. At a thought, it became clear to her that she and this man were of the same berry, even though they occupy a lower position. Catherine lay on the couch next to the stranger, and thought that these voices were saying the same thing. She realized that persuasion couldn't steal them away. They cling like leeches. They kept bugging her mom, too. Now she had done all she could and hoped the rain would stop tomorrow. She would have to start planting the garden with Roz. Still, Catherine didn't understand why this stranger was standing in the rain. She fell asleep with these thoughts. In the middle of the night, when the stranger woke up, he noticed Catherine lying next to him on the couch and decided to move her to bed. He laid her down in the bed, carefully fixing her hair so it wouldn't catch. Sitting down beside her, he whispered her name softly. Catherine. That day, Catherine's mother witnessed her husband cheating on her. She kicked him out into the street. He stood pathetically and begged her to let him back in. As she watched the maid with whom her husband had cheated on her being dragged away, she said to her daughter, "Catherine, this should be a lesson to you. If someone is rude to you, you must put a stop to such behavior without fear or delay. Only then will people understand their place and not dare to look down on you." She said it in a detached way, as if what was happening had nothing to do with her. But her voice was stern, as if she were talking about the worst thing in her life. Her mother told her that day she would make the woman who coveted another man's husband pay without fear. Catherine wondered at that moment if her mother wanted her to be like her in the future. At these thoughts, she woke up startled, looking up at the ceiling while lying in her bed. She went out for a walk around the house to get those thoughts out of her head. As she walked, she didn't understand why exactly she had dreamed this, since she had almost forgotten. And if she had dreamed about her mom, there might be nicer memories. The girl was surprised, for she didn't much remember where she had fallen asleep. But she didn't remember how she got to her bedroom. Suddenly, walking down the corridors, she noticed someone. She saw that strange man. He was standing by the window. She assumed he had come to his senses, but she didn't understand why he was still here. So Catherine went close to him and began to speak indignantly at him. But he immediately interrupted her and told her to come up. After that, he told her to shut up and look out the window. Catherine walked over, but she didn't understand what was wrong. When she looked out the window, she saw some strangers in dark cloaks. She didn't know who they were. After that, she took a closer look at them and saw the armor. She realized that they were knights from the Imperial Guard. After a brief silence, the man said that apparently the Imperial people had learned of what had recently happened in this house, and he'd told her that if she stayed there, she'd be in a lot of danger. Even if it was people this time, knights are quite capable of killing a man. All it takes is one little excuse, and the others will only have to bow their heads and close their eyes. Catherine asked if he was implying that they had come for her soul. The man replied that it could be said that way. The girl looked out the window again and said, "There you go. Thanks for the warning, but I still don't want to leave this house. So you all better just give up." The strangers were surprised at her phrase, "all of us." The girl explained that for her, he was almost no different from those knights, because he was just as likely to break into her house and disturb her life. They then moved away from the window and started to leave. The man said that this was already offensive and asked her to remind him who had carried her to the bedroom when she fell asleep. Catherine was outraged by this and asked if she could remind him who had saved him from a cold death last night. When the man tried to justify himself, the girl immediately interrupted him and said that because of him, she had gone out into the heavy rain and caught a cold. But she did not hear a word of gratitude in response. When he heard those words, he said she looked perfectly healthy, but decided to talk about something else. When they stopped, he said he'd better let her tell him where she was going, because she probably wouldn't pack up and leave in this weather. Catherine said she was at her home and didn't see where she was going to go from there, since these were the knights who had invaded someone else's domain. When they were getting acquainted, he heard it and asked if she was going to attack them. But the girl was no longer listening to him. She went to the place where tools are kept and took the shovel from there as a means of self-defense. But suddenly a man ran up and grabbed her from behind. He stopped Catherine and whispered in her ear that she was a silly girl. And at that moment the door creaked open. They turned around and saw those unfamiliar knights come into the house. One of them said, "It's nothing personal, but we have orders to kill you." At that moment his partner thought, "I wonder if this is the man." When Catherine saw them, she didn't expect them to be here already. She realized that she had to do something as soon as possible. But at that very moment, she saw the man who was standing next to her run up to those knights and start beating them. A few seconds later, they were already lying on the floor, dripping blood. The man approached them and said, "How dare you despicable people so brazenly break into someone else's home? Honor means nothing to the Imperial Guard anymore, I suppose? Or am I wrong, Sir Damien Rodina and Sir Cassin Clone?" the man asked. At that moment, Catherine thought that actually he had entered her place without permission too. So she said they had also broken into a house where a single woman lived, and asked that they not even think about making the excuse that they didn't know about it. One of them started apologizing for the inconvenience they had provided. The other began to shout that they were only looking around on orders, and they had no idea what was going to happen there. But the man interrupted him and said, "Cesare, Thoth continued and said that they did not know what was going to happen there, Mr. Cesare. At that moment, Catherine whispered to him that not only did he have a similar appearance, but his name was exactly like the Archduke's. Cesare replied that he often heard that. Suddenly their whispering was interrupted by the voice of one of the knights. He asked what Mr. Cesare was doing there. His partner elbowed him and asked what he was saying. At that moment a man came up to Catherine, put his arm around her shoulders, and said that he had dropped in on his beloved. They, the invited guests, had spoiled their fun by breaking into the house so late at night. He turned to the girl and asked if he was telling the truth. At that moment, Catherine thought his strategy made sense, but she didn't understand how he wasn't ashamed to say all this. Still, she could see he was trying to help her, so she decided to play along. She said that was right, and asked how he could not be upset when he'd had such a hot night ruined. When the knights heard this, one of them apologized and said that they had nothing to answer in their own defense. The other confirmed it. When Cesare heard this, he said to them, "Nothing, and I see you're still out of sorts. Come and see me when you return to the castle, will you?" At that moment, he leaned over to Catherine and said that he thought he had paid her enough for saving her from a cold death. But Catherine still wondered why he had intervened, for it surely wasn't just for her. After all, they weren't that close yet. Cesare shouted at the knights and said that maybe they would stop standing and finally leave if they were done. When things calmed down, they went back to the room with the fireplace, and he asked the girl what she was going to do with one shovel. Maybe she wanted the guardsmen to die laughing. Catherine told him that if he still cared about his life, he shouldn't do it again in the future. He put his arm around her waist and noticed that she was cold, so he invited her to sit by the fireplace. Catherine thanked him for his help. He looked at her carefully and said he was always at her service. When she sat down on the couch, she said that she would now give him the money he had left last time. Cesare said he didn't need it, because he didn't take money back. He then leaned closer to her and said that he had better let her give him the book, for it was very interesting. He would borrow it from the girl for a few days. He also told her not to tell him not to do it. He's going to take it anyway. Catherine was surprised to hear this, but told him to take it. He got excited and said that was the end of it. After that, he walked out the door. At this point, she thought he was quite good at surprising. The next morning, as Catherine was eating breakfast, Roz came up to her and asked if she had heard that Sir Percival was coming through town. Catherine was very surprised when she heard that name. Then the maid said, "Don't tell me you haven't heard of Sir Percival, the Paladin of Lilies." The girl said she might not have heard. Then Roz said that on the way back after conquering the demons he would stop by Christopher. But Catherine didn't listen any further. She reflected on the fact that as soon as she hears about the Lily Paladin, it always gets nasty. Percival Benedict Fachenlian, a descendant of royalty with a superior pedigree and ability, a true perfection nicknamed the Hero of the Holy City. He was indeed a famous person in the world. At that moment, Catherine remembered a situation from the past, when he had come to her and told her that she had a very luxurious bedroom for a maid, and that such a bedroom was proper for the daughter of a marquis. Anything could be, she thought. That country name, Anne Orleans, she made up too. In fact, Percival is some sort of a madman today, not a paladin of lilies. When Catherine lived in the lands of Viscount Orleans, Percival was her only salvation as well as her longtime love. She was like a caged bird then, and it was at that moment that Percival seemed to her an eagle that flew freely in the sky. That's why she liked him so much, even though their story didn't have a happy ending, and pleasant memories too. She still left her mark. After a while, Catherine thought that she hadn't thought of him at all in the time since they'd broken up, though she figured he'd probably forgotten about her too. So it didn't matter anymore. When the girl heard a sound outside the window, she walked over and saw Sir Damien sitting there. "No, is it at all normal to have such a large mansion and no gardener?" he said to himself. Catherine thought that you couldn't tell he was such a grouch. Sir Damien, who had broken in last night, had said he would atone for his wine by working for her for 10 days. Catherine thought it was quite advantageous for her, because she could save money on a gardener. But she wondered if it was normal for the Archduke to command the Imperial Guard as he pleased. After petting her cat, she asked how she was keeping up. Every time she sees her, grows 10 times bigger. After all, not long ago it was so small, and now he's all grown up. At that moment, Catherine remembered that her mother had said something like that too. How she missed her. Then suddenly she started to get nervous and wondered where she had put her mother's portrait. She remembered that she had decided to put it in a book so she wouldn't lose it, and she chose just the red and brightest one, just what Cesare had decided to take. She'd completely forgotten that she had put a valuable thing there and easily gave away that book. The girl realized that if he lost it, it would be terrible, because such a portrait could not be found anywhere else. Such anxiety began to descend the stairs, and she thought, just so long as he was okay. When she opened the door to the basement, there was still that symbol there, and someone's voice spoke. "He who possesses me will rule the world." Catherine thought to herself she didn't want to do this, but she had no choice right now. So she picked up the mop and began to clean the symbol. When she'd first met Cesare, she'd been trying to erase that magic pattern. She wondered if she could summon it again. As she scrubbed the floor, she wondered why she hadn't even checked which book she'd given him. Her musings were interrupted by the voice of Cesare, who said, "For some reason I figured it would be you. No one else would do such a thing with a magic circle." When Catherine heard his voice, she immediately ran up to him and apologized for summoning him so suddenly. But she had a request for him. He was very surprised when he heard that she had a request. The girl said it was about that book he had borrowed. She asked if he could return it right away. He said he would give it back now. Afterward, he asked that Catherine go to him, held out his hand, and they flew together. Before she could think of anything else, Catherine took Cesare's outstretched hand, and in an instant, instead of a horrible basement, she found herself in a magnificent mansion. When she looked out the window, she thought it was very peaceful and cozy, and if she was right, it was Duke Christopher's domain. Catherine thought that if she asked him directly, he would probably be sneaky and say that he heard about it often, but that suddenly her musings were interrupted by Cesare's voice. "Lady Fani, Soul and Memory, did you need this book?" Catherine walked over to him and said that was right, that's what it was called. The man said it was the only book with a drawing between the pages, and if it was so dear to the girl, why didn't she remember its name? The girl took the book from him and told him that he had memorized it himself and asked if he had even read it. At that moment she flipped through the book and saw a portrait of her mother. That calmed her down. She then showed him the portrait and asked him casually if he knew this person. He replied that he was seeing her for the first time. He also asked who it was. Catherine said it was the man she was looking for, just a portrait. It turned up in the bedroom of her mansion, so she thought he might know her. At that moment, the girl thought that perhaps even Cesare couldn't know everything in the world. She suggested that perhaps her mother had only stayed in that house for a short time. Suddenly there was a knock on the room. The man told Gren to come in. When he came in, he apologized for being so sudden, but he had something to say. Cesare said it was no big deal and let him speak in front of a woman. Then Gren said it was about the feast to celebrate the paladin's return to the holy city. The man took the papers the assistant held out to him and said that these saints could only talk forever. They were nothing but trouble. At that moment, Catherine thought that when they had first met, he had asked if she was a chain dog, or a dog of the Holy See. She suddenly wondered what his relationship with the Holy City was. Then Cesare said we'd have to have a goat festival. She had it spread everywhere that if you smeared yourself in goat droppings, it would bring good luck. He also told them to get a little poop on them. That would be enough to keep them quiet and go away. Cesare spoke quite seriously. At this point, Catherine thought she should try not to pay attention. After all, she had chocolate cake on her plate. She said he was joking, but the man replied that he was dead serious. Then Catherine said that she would go home already because it was getting late. Besides, she was worried that Sir Damien wouldn't do anything to her garden. Cesare told her that he would like to suggest that she stay a little longer. Well, when it comes to Sir Damien, yes, there's nothing more to be done. And all he hoped was that being a member of the Imperial Guard would be of use to her. When she wanted to object to him, Cesare immediately held out his hand to go home. At that moment, Catherine thought it was so strange. Every time he did that, her heart started beating faster. It's just a small act of kindness, but until a couple days ago his smile had caused her confusion, and now he just seems shameless. As they walked, Cesare said that in the future she should memorize the names of the books that were so dear to her, at least if she didn't want to get into an embarrassing situation like today. Catherine asked him how she could contact him if she needed anything. At that moment, she wondered why she had said that. After all, it sounded as if she wanted to keep her lover. Cesare asked the girl if she needed him. Catherine said that if Sir Damien tried to escape during the night, he would need to report it. At that moment, Catherine thought that there was little else that could happen at the mansion, and she couldn't try to wash away the magic circle every time she needed Cesare. He said he could find out about Sir Damien anyway if she asked him to. He put the key in her hand with those words. He explained that if she needed it, she could use the key. She would figure out how to use it on her own. Cesare said that he would look forward to seeing them, and he was curious to know why she might need him. Catherine said she shouldn't expect it so much. Before they left, the maids came up to them and told her to come again. And next time they would make her favorite Madeline's cookies and herbal tea. When she got home, she started looking at the key and realized that she never asked how to use it. But she thought it would be better to start by putting it somewhere so she wouldn't lose it. At that moment, Roz burst into the room and shouted, "Mistress, you're back already!" When Catherine asked what was wrong, the maid said that they had to hurry because the paladins of the Holy City were outside. They say that this house is a hotbed of evil, and that Catherine and Roz are demons. When the girl heard all this, she thought they might have come for the same purpose as the guardsmen last night. But this time, Cesare wasn't there, and she didn't know what to do. But then she realized that she couldn't rely on him for everything. She had to deal with the situation herself. At that moment she thought that Percival might be with them. Suddenly Catherine looked up and saw the paper bag, thinking that if she was careful, everything would end well. At that moment, outside, the paladins were talking to Damien. One of them asked where his pride was, how he himself was not ashamed to work with a gardener in such a place. He asked how dare he still call himself an imperial guard. Damien asked a little quieter so he could hear him, and So asked him to stop yelling, until his fist killed the pride on his face. But then suddenly, his threats were interrupted by Catherine's voice, telling him to stop swearing and come over to her. When Damien looked at her, he was very surprised and asked what happened to her, because she had a paper bag over her head. The girl said it wasn't a big deal, just a pimple popped out on her cheek, and asked them to ignore it, but rather tell them what was wrong there. Damien said that Mr. Mal arrived with the paladins and they started talking some crap and about her worshipping demons or something. Catherine knew they would say something like that, and they're here because of the magic circle in her basement. Catherine stepped closer and said hello to Mr. Mel. He apologized for the sudden visit. An order had come from the temple that the land must be cleansed of evil forces. He said that he understood that they had just returned from an expedition against demons, so they hadn't had time to warn her of their visit beforehand. The girl said she understood and asked them to go forward. She thought they had gone with Percival. At that moment, the gate opened. When one of the paladins came through, he said that she would regret letting them in here. The girl said affably that she had only moved in a month ago, so the house was a bit messy, so she apologized in advance. When he walked a little further, he said that an unholy energy hit his nose. Then he looked at the grass and said that this cat was controlled by evil. When Catherine heard this, she asked Mr. Mal if he had definitely brought real paladins. Ignoring her question, he told Carlos that it was the most common street cat. Yes, Carlos heard it. Then he started yelling for her to shut up and asked how dare she interrupt when the paladin was speaking. But the girl didn't listen to him. She wondered why the cat had gotten smaller, but notwithstanding, Devon said he had been holding himself back for a long time, but this was too much. He went up to Carlos and said that paladins always ruin everything. When Devon tried to hit him, he accidentally flicked his wig off with his hand, and now Carlos was standing there bald. Everyone around him was surprised. As everyone started laughing, Catherine turned her attention to the meow. At that moment, the cat said, "Everyone saw his wig come off. Now that's funny." She couldn't believe her eyes. The cat was actually talking. Carlos said he knew it all along, and he wasn't going to let it go. He started to draw his sword to get revenge. But at that moment, Percival joined them and said that it was all very boring, and that Carlos had finally decided to spoil all the fun. Catherine knew that Percival would be with them, so she was glad that she had decided to wear a bread bag on her head. Percival came closer and said that if it were him, he would run away in shame. When Carlos heard that, he was surprised and asked what he was saying. He didn't understand how one could run away when evil was right in front of them. Carlos asked how Percival could express himself like that. but the man got angry and asked why he had to obey him. After that, he walked closer to him and said, "You think I came here because I trusted an idiot like you? Make no mistake about it. I was just bored spending the morning in this dull little town." Percival said that may not be the case for a loyal paladin like him, but working as a dog of the Holy See and punitive expeditions are enough. When Catherine saw the whole picture, she knew that Percival had not changed at all. His demeanor and speech were completely out of character for a paladin. It was exactly as she remembered him. After a short silence, Percival said that if he had heard him, that was the end of the comedy, and ordered him to return to the hotel because he was already hungry. But he suddenly stopped and said there was a strange thing. He looked at the girl and said that she reminded him very much of someone. With that cocky look, voice, and physique, he said she looked so much like her it was sickening. Catherine became nervous. At that moment, Percival stepped closer to her, slapping his hand against a tree. He asked if she happened to know who he was talking about. When the girl didn't answer, he asked her name. At that moment, Catherine thought, "Why did I make contact with him again?" She didn't know what to make up in her defense, and that's when the girl said, "Goat droppings." Percival was not surprised by this, and he told her to be careful. "Carlos has nothing to be proud of but his background and his mansion," he said as he left. When all the carriages had parted, Catherine thought that Percival had obviously meant her by goat droppings. She took off her mask. Catherine thought he had already forgotten her existence. She couldn't believe he still remembered her. The next day, Roz asked if Catherine wanted to see the procession of paladins. They were walking down the street. Roz replied that, of course, because they are very beautiful, even though they don't behave very well. But they look majestic. Catherine said she would go ahead. Roz wished her a good time and said they would meet back at home. Sir Carlos said the meow was a demon, but in the end they decided to take it in. Devon, after everything that happened, asked if demons could be kept as pets, but Catherine decided to keep him anyway because he was very cute. Before he left, Mr. Mal said that this demon cat almost got him in trouble. In other words, Mr. Mal didn't care if the cat was a demon or not. To become a wizard in this world, one must necessarily make a contract with a demon. That's why in Christopher, the land of the great wizard, people exalt mages and are quite friendly to demons. When the people in the crowd saw Percival, they began to say, "O pride of the holy city, Sir Percival, paladin of the lilies, look here, I am here. Ah, have I lived to see him with my own eyes?" At that moment, Catherine remembered a moment from the past. "Let's drop everything and run away, and meet tomorrow at noon under the elm tree. I'll be waiting for you." Those were Percival's words from long ago. Of course, Catherine wanted no part of his foolish scheme, but she had no choice. Then suddenly a man riding a horse passed by Catherine and noticed her. He turned sharply, and the girl tried to run away. As she ran, she thought it must be a joke. She didn't understand how he could have spotted her in such a crowd. Catherine thought that she had come to this procession for nothing. If she met this madman again, she would no longer be able to leave with her head held high. Therefore, she could not under any circumstances allow that to happen. When she had run far enough away and disappeared around the corner, she thought she had succeeded in escaping. She believed he wouldn't have choked through the crowd to catch up with her. Suddenly, someone grabbed her shoulder. She was startled and fell to the ground. When she looked up, she saw Devon and asked what he was doing here. The man explained that he had come to buy a pest control product, and the store owner said he had to watch the store and keep an eye on what was going on. Catherine thought, pest control? She looked around and realized that she ended up outside a flower store in the square as she ran. She ended up coming back to the same place. Devon speculated that perhaps the man was madly in love with Catherine, and that's why he was chasing her. Well, love and love. "Why secret at once?" questioned Catherine. "They say he's been engaged to someone since birth, rumored to be a fearsome beauty," said Devon. "Percival used to have a bride, according to rumor. It was a girl from birth who had poor health and was often sick," he added. "Her existence had almost no impact on his life, while there were many contradictions in Catherine Orleans," Devon continued. "She tried to hide her true face as much as possible and not to clash with anyone. And outside of it, she wore the mask of a cunning girl who was quite capable of bullying any paladin of the Holy See," he explained. "So even if Percival didn't have a fiancée, still couldn't stay together." At this point, Catherine asked Devon what he thought if a man offered a girl to run away together. What would that say about his attitude toward her? Devon replied that it meant he loved her, and asked, "And what did he offer you that?" After a brief silence, Devon asked the girl, "Did she really turn him down?" Catherine rose to her feet and said that she had given her consent, and they had eloped on the appointed day. The girl then asked from a rational point of view, "Isn't that absurd?" Then the man said that it turns out she was a ruthless realist from a young age. Catherine asked that they end the conversation about the past on that note. If he bought everything, she said, they could go back to the mansion. Catherine at the time also thought that with the help of strong love, one could overcome any obstacle, but she didn't know if Percival thought the same way. She assumed she was just haunted by the memories of that day. After all, they are not close enough to pine for each other or regret what happened back then. As the sun began to set, Catherine and the gardener finally returned home. Roz ran up to them and said that the lady was a little late. Then she asked what they had bought. Catherine explained that Devon had asked her to buy weed killer and gardening tools. Afterwards, she looked in her purse and thought it was good, of course, that he was working for free. But his purchases had hit her wallet hard, and now she really needed to start earning money. Catherine thought, maybe she should look at the ad in the paper. When the girl entered the room, she asked her maid, "Where is today's paper?" But then suddenly a man was in the room, and he said he had taken it first to read. Catherine was very surprised and asked Cesare, what business did he come to see her about? The man explained that he had just stopped by to see if she was okay. Cesare told her to sit down by him, and the girl asked, "My place?" The man asked how her mansion was, and if there were any strange things going on that scared or confused her. Catherine didn't even know what to say to him about it, but she said she was fine, but Rose had suffered until she got used to it. The girl said that her maid had told her about strange noises coming from the hall, and she had nightmares almost daily. So the girl gave her a room next to her own, and after that, all the weirdness magically stopped. Catherine suggested that it might be all about the magic circle that was in the basement, but then suddenly there was a strange sound in the window, which was very loud. Outside, instead of entering through the front door, Percival broke down the fence. Cesare said that she had an extremely uninvolved visitor, and he smelled like a burst sewer pipe. He then asked, "Is it possible for one of the paladins to visit her?" But the girl remained silent and just walked to the window. When she saw the broken wall, she hoped she had gotten away safely, but he had managed to follow her all the way to the mansion. Catherine then told her guest that she needed to get away for a while. The man asked if it would be okay to go down to his place alone. The girl said that everything would be fine, and even if he heard any noise, let him not go outside under any circumstances. And she herself thought it unlikely that she would be able to regulate the situation without a quarrel, but today she must deal with Percival once and for all. When Catherine went outside, Percival said he kept wondering why her voice sounded familiar. At that moment he thought that she simply couldn't be in such a place, so he thought he was an idiot who still couldn't forget her. But his assumption was correct. Afterward, Percival said that they hadn't seen Anne in a long time. Catherine said hello to Percival. Afterward she asked, what did he come for? And she said that he had certainly not come to vent his anger on her. The guy walked closer to her and said he wanted to ask her something. Why didn't she come that day? Percival told her not to misunderstand him. He just wanted to temper his curiosity. And he asked why she hadn't been under the tree that day. Catherine said at once that she had not been there because she had not wanted to come. Then she added that he, too, had not come to the appointed place. The girl said that not only did she not show up at the designated place, and he wasn't there either, but she wouldn't ask why he didn't show up, because Catherine, unlike him, doesn't tend to dwell on the past. In fact, she wasn't going to participate in Percival's foolish escape plan from the start, but she was a little curious as to whether Percival would really come to that tree. As she rode in her carriage, she asked that the carriage be stopped briefly near their meeting place. The maid asked if the mistress had lost anything in that place, but Catherine said the azaleas were so beautiful. Percival never came then, and strangely enough she felt relieved, as if a stone had been lifted from her soul. When she looked up at the tree briefly more to make sure he wasn't coming, she said she'd had enough of the flowers and now they could go back to the mansion. To put it simply, Percival was not a special person for Catherine. When the girl told him the story, he said that she had changed a lot. But after all this time, It was not to be expected. Percival smiled afterward and said that he must have lost his mind in following her. Afterward, he put on her head the hat she had then lost at the feast, and he said that he had pondered on the road and had come to the conclusion that she should change her place of residence, because an idiot like him might come after her again. It sounded like a threat, but he left after that. At that moment, Cesare came outside and asked how Lady Fanny felt about going back inside. Unless, of course, she wants to meet Percival's gaze when he suddenly decides to turn around. Catherine walked up to him and asked, "Does he really think he will?" Cesare said that he hadn't specifically overheard their conversation, but he found it hard to imagine otherwise. At that moment, Catherine thought that perhaps she should have sent him away, or suggested that he talk somewhere else. But had she ever been the kind of person who cared about the opinions of others? After all this, when the girl had already gone to bed, she was awakened by some terrible sound like a tremor. At this moment, a monster was running through the corridors of the mansion, shouting out that he had finally reached Eden and had succeeded in the long-awaited summoning after all. When Catherine stepped out into the hallway and saw this monster, she thought her house was in ruins again. She didn't understand why these creatures appeared and destroyed other people's property. At that moment, she thought it was more important to find out where Rose and Devon were now, and she needed to get to the bottom of the situation before either of them got hurt by this monster. Not only that, if she threw herself into the fight with her bare hands, he would just crush her. At this moment, she started touching her neck pendant due to fear, and she remembered that this was the same key Cesare had given her to summon him in case of any accidents. Now she understood the meaning of his words, because every time Cesare came to or left her mansion, he was sure to do so through the door. She thought she could meet him too if she used the door and that magic key. So she went to the door and decided to try her theory. When she turned the key in the lock, the door opened immediately, and she saw Cesare's office and himself sitting at his desk. When he saw Lady Fanny, he asked what occasion she had come to see him so early. The girl started stuttering, trying to say something. At that moment she thought she had to hurry, but somehow she was unable to take her eyes off him. Gathering her thoughts a little, she apologized to Cesare for such an unexpected visit, but she needed immediate help. When the man got up and came to her, the girl explained that this time, a strange horse-faced monster had appeared in the mansion, destroying everything in its path. She doesn't know where Rose and Devon are, but it would be better to deal with the problem before they got hurt because of that thing. Cesare said he understood, and advised her to calm down first. He had given her something useful for such occasions, so she has no need to look for it every time. Catherine remembered that he had given her a key with which she could always come to him in case of need. At that moment the man put his coat on her. The girl said that even if she had gotten the key from him, he was not obliged to fulfill her requests all the time. And she thought to herself that I was ashamed of him, because Cesare was absolutely right. Catherine didn't understand why she was trying to solve her personal problems with his help. I was already uneasy that he'd seen their conversation with Percival, so now she reappeared in front of him in such an inappropriate manner. The man said she had misunderstood him, and he didn't mean it. He hadn't explained it to her properly, and that was his fault. That Cesare is not so kind as to convey to everyone the meaning of his words, but in the present situation he has nothing else to do. He asked Lady Fanny if he could look at the key. The girl immediately gave the man the key. As Cesare began to examine the key, he asked, "Did she really carry it around her neck all the time?" Catherine said it was exactly like that. But at that moment the man laughed loudly. The girl did not understand what made him laugh so funny, so she turned it around and told them to go to her mansion quickly, and if we delayed, there would be no stone left of the house. Cesare said he would replace the broken key string later. When they returned to the mansion, Cesare said that, just as he had told her, there was no need to visit him. A dead monster lay before them. At that moment, the girl thought that this was the same creature that had destroyed the mansion after all. She wondered who had dealt with such a bulky man. At that moment, Devon came up to them and asked if Mistress was unharmed. He was very frightened when he thought the monster had eaten her. Catherine said that was exactly what she was going to say. Then she asked where Rosa was. Devon explained that Miss Rosa had gone into town early in the morning to buy some groceries, so she was perfectly safe for now. Well, much more important to him was the fact that the destruction of the mansion had caused the garden he'd just tidied up to be littered with trash again. But Catherine wasn't listening to him, and realized that by something useful, Cesare meant Devon. Indeed, although Devon looks like a simple guy, he's actually an imperial knight, and hence can masterfully wield a sword. As long as Davina resides under the roof of her mansion, she, as the owner of the place, can utilize his security services. Catherine realized that it followed that Cesare cared about her safety, but she didn't know how to describe the feeling she felt. A little calmer, she thanked Cesare. The man then turned to Sir Devon and said that the monster had appeared in the mansion, and he was only concerned about the garden. He had not yet reformed himself. So Cesare decided to extend his punishment for another 3 months. So the entire mansion returned to peace and quiet once again. Devon turned at Cesare's orders and was forced to stay in the mansion for another 3 months. Although Devon's salary is paid by Cesare, which is a big relief for Catherine. But it could mean that similar incidents will continue to happen at her mansion. She certainly appreciates Cesare's concern for her humble person, but she needs to learn to deal with her own problems. There's no telling when someone who knows anything about her mother might visit the mansion. In fact, she wants to stay in this place as long as possible. When she read the newspaper, she was very surprised because there was such a serious incident, and there was not a single article about it in the newspaper. Come to think of it, it was exactly the same in the case of the goat head. Even though the collapse of the mansion made a lot of noise, everyone acted as if they didn't notice what happened. But her musings were interrupted by Rose, who ran out to her and told her that a guest had come and asked if she would accompany her to the drawing room. The girl was very surprised when she heard that she had visitors, because she was not expecting anyone. But the maid said that the girl called herself Catherine's younger sister. At this moment, standing at the entrance of the mansion, the girl with golden hair thought that even though the facade was a bit old, the house looked pretty good. At that moment, she thought that perhaps things hadn't turned out so badly for Catherine. When her sister came out to the girl, she said she was exhausted from walking up that rough road. She also asked if she would bring her a drink, preferably warm chrysanthemum tea, made from the finest flowers in Edinburgh. Catherine ignored her request and told her to get straight to the main thing, the reason she had come here. Marjane said that her sister hadn't changed a bit, and afterwards she asked, "Is that the first thing you will say to your little sister whom you have not seen for so long?" Marjane asked how in general a person could be so heartless, and she would feel so bad if they asked how she was doing. At that moment, Catherine thought that nothing had changed. Marjane was still a child. Marjane is Anne's twin sister. Her character is the exact opposite of Anne's, and she and Catherine are very close. And of course, if Marjane has come all this way to find Catherine, then prepare for the worst. The sister said. Good. Since she had started the conversation in such a manner, she would go straight to the news most interesting to her. Marjane said that Anne was getting married soon. When Catherine heard that, she realized that it wasn't as bad as she'd thought. She asked her sister if she was serious. Marjane said that everything was serious, and her chosen one was not Catherine's former fiancé, Charles Killholder, but Earl Miriam Chen. When Catherine heard this, she was surprised because Miriam Chen is an old man who has already passed his 6th decade, and said that Anne's pride would not allow her to marry such a man. That old man fell in love with Anne, gave her a villa and all his jewelry, and is willing to do anything for her. Marjane asked Catherine if she had forgotten that Anne loved money. When she saw the luxury that was not even close to the wealth of the Killholder family's modest estate, she immediately fell for the Earl's bait. Even though he had already seduced 2 young noblewomen in the same way, he also divorced each before they celebrated their 25th anniversary. Anne is absolutely confident. She believes she can keep an old man under her thumb even when she's in her 40s. Marjane pulled out an envelope and said it was an invitation to Anne's wedding. I took 5 envelopes from her and am distributing them to her enemies, in case someone shows up and disrupts this horrible wedding ceremony. Catherine took the envelope and asked if her sister thought she could sit back after saying that. Marjane said that was to be expected from her sister. Her sister said she gave her the invitation, and now she needed some sleep because she'd used up all her energy on the way to the mansion. Catherine didn't mind and told her to rest and asked if she would be woken up before dinner was served. Marjane said she would be woken up earlier if she didn't get up. The girl then took a blanket and covered her sister with it, and thought it was the first time she had met any of her family since leaving the Orléans residence. But for some reason she had an ambivalent feeling at that moment. Afterward, Catherine went into the drawing room and read the newspaper. There was a knock at her door, and she asked Lady Fanny if she could come in. When she allowed it, Cesare came into the room. The girl was very surprised and asked what business brought him in. He asked if she could spare him some time. As they began to talk, Cesare asked, "Didn't I promise to pay Sir Devon's salary the other day? I need it at the Imperial Bank too." At that moment, Catherine wondered why she had so many guests visiting her today. But she replied that only 3 months' salary needed to be paid, so she offered to pay him in cash. Cesare said that even if it was 3 months, he still wouldn't recommend that she keep the money in the mansion where anything could happen. Catherine said he was right about that. But the Imperial Bank already had an account in Catherine Orlean's name. She decided to agree with him so that he would get off her back. Because if Cesare confronts Marjane, she will have more problems. So Catherine told Cesare that she heard him. But since she hasn't used her bank account in a while, she's not sure if it's really okay. So she needs to check. Suddenly at that moment, Marjane came running into the room and said she was starving, asking if they had anything to eat. When Cesare saw the girl, he apologized. He didn't know Catherine had guests and asked if she could introduce them. Catherine immediately jumped to her feet, ran up to the girl and told her that this was her younger sister, Marjane, and he could address her simply by her first name. As Catherine was about to introduce Cesare to her sister, Margiana interrupted her and asked, "Your Highness, Archduke?" But the girl said it wasn't him, even though they looked very much alike. But when she wanted to say his name, the man stood up and said that he looked like Archduke Christopher. He then approached the girl and told her that he was pleased to meet Miss Marjane, and told her that she could call him Cesare. Marjane said that both the name and the face are the same, but he dares to claim to be a different person. The girl said it was a very funny coincidence. Then Cesare answered her that even such things happen in life, especially what was the point of lying to a young lady with whom he had never crossed paths before. He said that the world is originally made up of countless coincidences, even though one day these coincidences come together and turn to inevitability. As Catherine looked at them, she thought there was a sense of tension in the air for some reason, but suddenly, Marjane interrupted their awkward silence and said that she'd completely forgotten that she was supposed to meet her friend in the evening. Hearing that, Catherine was surprised, but her sister said she was glad not to see her, and she would be on her way. Catherine said it was nice to see her too, and to be careful. Marjane said that she knew the address of the hotel where she was staying, so she could come to it whenever she wanted. Then she wished them a good time. When she was out the door, Catherine immediately apologized to Cesare because her sister's manners left a lot to be desired. But initially, she was quite different. The man said that everything was fine and she didn't have to worry about it. At this point, Catherine thought she was worried about her sister because it seemed to her that her well-being had suddenly deteriorated dramatically. Cesare asked, before they finished talking about finances, if she could first close her eyes for just a second. When Catherine heard that, she was very surprised. Even though there was nothing difficult about it, she didn't want to do it. But looking at him, she said she would grant his request. At that moment, she didn't understand why he suddenly asked her to close her eyes. She figured he wasn't the type to do strange things anyway, so she had no reason to refuse. When quite some time had passed, Catherine wondered to what length she should stand with her eyes closed, and at that moment she opened one eye to check. But she was very surprised when she opened her eyes, for it appeared that Cesare had already left the room. At this moment, she thought that maybe it was just her imagination, but the atmosphere in the mansion was eerie. It felt like it was getting colder, but she couldn't figure out where Cesare had gone, leaving her alone. When she stepped out into the hallway, she didn't see anyone in the mansion. She started shouting out different names. "Cesare? Rosa? Devon? Where are you all?" But as she walked down the stairs, she noticed something strange. Her maid Rose was lying in the corner, and when Catherine saw her, she ran to her at once, took her head and asked if she was okay. But the girl didn't answer. She was unconscious. When Catherine took her hand, she realized her body was warm and there was a blush on her cheeks. When the girl assumed her maid was just sleeping, she thought it might be some kind of spell, so she decided to check on Devon as well. When she ran outside, she saw him lying under a tree. When she got closer, she figured Devon was always asleep, so it was hard to know if it was the spell or not. But right now there was no way to wake him up. Then Catherine assumed that the whole mansion was enchanted. The girl wondered who could have created such a thing. She thought the first suspect that came to mind But then suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted. A cat came up behind her and asked why the spell didn't work on Catherine. When the girl turned around and saw the cat, she realized it was the cat's meow. She wondered if he had enchanted the mansion. The cat came closer and said it wasn't him. He had come because he was worried that something bad might have happened to her and resented her suspicions. The girl apologized for her accusations, and then the cat came closer to her and said that it was the work of a man, a fearsome and strong creature who came to her often. Because of its smarmy appearance, an even more annoying silver-haired devil. Catherine told the cat to be quiet. She explained that she shouldn't talk out loud about who he really is. The cat said that Catherine was very strange, because she calmly talks to the scary and disgusting creature and protects him in every way possible. And judging by the fact that she's the only one who isn't mesmerized, he can conclude that he likes her. Catherine said it was because magic didn't work on her. It's been that way since she was born. That's not to say she's immune to any kind of Vedo magic, but it must have been her incompatibility with magic that allowed Catherine to see Cesare's true nature from the start. The meow replied to her that anyhow, love relationships between a man and a woman are complicated and not always fruitful. And anyway, he made sure she was safe and sound, so he would go and sleep somewhere. It didn't take him long to come in for some refreshment, and he ended up making a mistake. Catherine thought that, as she'd suspected, the spell had been cast by Cesare. She was shocked that he'd managed to put the whole mansion to sleep. She wondered for what reason he had decided to use such a powerful spell. No matter how much she ponders, no answer comes to mind. She thinks she should return to the living room before Cesare finds her awake and walking quietly around the mansion. When she passed the basement, she was surprised because she had definitely closed the door there, but now it was open. Maybe she didn't realize what that vein-chilling energy was. Catherine realized that it was clearly coming from the room where the magic circle was, but suddenly a man came crawling to her from the basement. He asked her to help him and save him. The stranger said he would never set foot in this house again, and begged to be rescued. When Catherine tried to climb down to somehow help the stranger, she tripped over a step and fell. Suddenly she heard a voice saying, "Ah, here's the thing. Now I finally understand why you can't hear, see, or feel anything." Stepping over the pool of blood, the man said that by the same token she had overcome the spell that had been cast and was standing before him as if nothing had happened. It was Cesare. His eyes were glowing purple at the moment, and he asked, "Isn't this the annihilation of magic?" Magic annihilation is the ability to neutralize magic that was given from birth. At that moment, Catherine thought that because of a foolish mistake her secret had been revealed. Cesare explained to Lady Fani that those with the ability to nullify magic were unique geniuses, and as a future subject of the Empire, she was to receive magical education in accordance with imperial laws. It was also mandatory that the subject of demonology be part of the curriculum. Cesare asked if he was in the right. When Catherine confirmed what he said, he asked if she would then tell him what color his eyes were now. At that moment, she remembered her mother's words. People with incredible magical powers could be identified by the color of their eyes, and purple was considered the most dangerous among them. She wasn't sure about the other colors, but one must be on guard around those with violet eyes because they are devils in the flesh. At that moment, Catherine realized that the violet eyes were a symbol of the devil, and that was the true identity of Archduke Cesare Christopher. The girl said he had a beautiful shade of purple. Cesare replied that in all his life he had never heard anyone use the adjective beautiful to describe his eye color. In a world where even roadside weeds are endowed with power, only humans are born without it. Therefore, for humans to use magic, they must contract with a race that has mana. Therefore, the Iterian imperial family has been cultivating and raising more than a dozen demons as their subordinates for generations. This was also the basis for the empire to become the conqueror of the continent, and its inhabitants were exceptionally friendly to demons. However, the reason for all this was only because demons had value as a tool to achieve some goals. Even though most of the wizards belonging to the empire have made contracts with demons, demons are still targets of reprisal by the papal curia. If it became known that one of them was among the ruling class, there would be serious repercussions. In other words, Cesare will try to get rid of Catherine, who knows his true identity. At that moment, the man snapped his fingers, and Catherine thought he must have broken the spell cast on the mansion. Cesare said he had finished all his work. even though this time he had to do a lot of work to find all the rats that were hiding in the mansion. Catherine thought that now it was her turn to part with her life. Strangely enough, she felt no excitement. She feels no resentment or fear. Perhaps she only feels a little regret because she tried her best to keep her distance from him, knowing who he really is. But at some point she'd grown close to him, and the thought had crept into her head that spending time together over a cup of tea was quite fun. At that moment she thought, did she really think so alone? And it turns out that his display of kindness toward Catherine was only a pretense. Natalia, in such a case, remains undeniable that Ocesaria has helped her a lot. Therefore, she does not need to regret anything. The thought of such a great being considering her as his friend seemed far more ridiculous and ridiculous. At that moment, Cesare stepped closer to her and held out his hand, saying that it had been a long time since someone had managed to wrap his arm around him so flawlessly. I think the girl deserves praise. When Catherine got up, he started to leave and said it was time for them to talk about what the parents had time to discuss last time. Catherine was surprised and asked Cesare if he would kill her. When the man heard this, he was very surprised. And then the girl explained that not outright killing, but maybe he would entrust her to her grandfather, inside the basement. She told him to let him know that she would accept any death, though she would prefer a less painful one. Catherine hoped that he would do her that favor as a token of their friendship. Cesare said she was talking nonsense again. He asked that she keep silent about the magic circle of his true essence, and if she complied, he would not harm her in any way. She doesn't believe human promises, so told her to find a way to prove to him that he could trust her, and that she was not his enemy. Cesare thinks that the one who should be held accountable for what happened is her little sister, because she's the one who brought this garbage he had to deal with today. He told the girl to be careful because anything could happen. After a while, Catherine sat drinking tea, thinking about Marjane being very late. She couldn't believe that they might meet today. Disregard Cesare's advice. She decided to speak to Varjata directly. Her unexpected arrival pleased Catherine, though. When Marjane finally arrived, she came into the room and apologized for keeping her sister waiting. But the view from the window of the hotel she had chosen was terrible, so she urgently moved to another place. Catherine said it was no big deal, and she herself had only gotten there a few minutes ago. Marjane said that she wanted her sister to answer why Archduke Christopher was in her house anyway, and whether she was really dating him. But at the same time, Catherine's soul continued to be troubled by doubts about her sister. Catherine told Marjane to keep her voice down. Marjane said she can't believe her baby sister's life has changed dramatically. She said she couldn't think of a better reason to disrupt Anne's wedding. She had thought she had no such relationship with Cesare at all, but she had already missed the moment to give a full explanation. So Catherine said she would get right to the point and asked what purpose her sister had in appearing to her as soon as she learned that she was living in the mansion. Marjane said that she was just about to tell her sister everything, but because of the Archduke's sudden appearance, she was unable to do so. She said that Anne was the reason, and the mere thought made her furious. Marjane said that Anne had probably told her mother some nonsense, and a few weeks earlier, her mother had unexpectedly told her that she had found her a worthy candidate to marry. So Marjane has to quit her studies immediately and return to her father's house. She's going to sell herself to an old man of 70 and get a gold mine in return. When Catherine heard this, she thought it was no surprise, because her stepmother, having become rich thanks to Anne, had decided to take advantage of her second daughter as well, because she was constantly rebuking Marjane, saying that there was no point in a woman getting an education at all. So Marjane turned the house upside down and ran away, completely cutting all ties with the family. When Catherine heard this, she was shocked and asked what her sister was doing now. The girl said that she got a job at the Imperial Castle on the professor's recommendation. Yesterday, she was also going to that mansion for work. It had never occurred to her that he would turn out to be her property. Catherine was very surprised that she had taken a job at the Imperial Castle. Then that man was a man from the Imperial Castle. Catherine wondered what kind of work Marjane was doing in the Imperial Palace if she had come to her accompanied by those men. She didn't understand what Cesare wanted to warn her about. She should be wary of the Imperial Castle or of Marjane herself. Her sister said that before she was kicked out of the house, she made a huge scandal, saying everything to her mother and Anne for Catherine and herself. When she asked if Catherine had done well, she didn't know what to say. After a little thought, she said that she had done a great job, and she wished she could have seen their faces at that moment. Marjane said they were very angry, and it was the first time she had ever seen her mother's face so twisted with anger. She did not even know how to describe it. Catherine figured that Marjane was just doing what she was told. Without knowing the details, she would never have come to the mansion if she hadn't known that Catherine might be in danger. They may not be sisters, but they are still family to each other. In the evening, as Catherine was getting ready for bed, she looked at her mother's picture and realized that she had never learned anything from Marjane. But she doesn't want her death to be useless, if possible. She'd like to see her mother, and she's sure her mother is still alive. Besides, that's all Catherine does. So it is cleaning the mansion and dealing with all sorts of monsters, so she cannot enjoy her freedom to the fullest. If, while continuing to live at the same pace, she suddenly dies, she will no doubt regret it in hell for 100 years. Cesare's words about not believing in human promise must mean that he will renounce vows that are only words, or for which a certain price must be paid. Then the only way is to make a contract with the devil. There are others, of course, but this method alone is an extremely serious offense under imperial law, because the collateral of the contract with the devil is the human soul. When the life of a person who is a magician ends, the devil eats his soul and gets great magical power. In other words, the soul becomes part of the devil's power. Moreover, it will take a century for the soul absorbed by the devil to completely disappear. But they only live once anyway, so it's worth going all in, even if Catherine has to become devil's food. She wants to live this life right. Then the girl went straight to Cesare's house. When she came in and he saw her, he said that he had said he would give her as much time as she needed. But judging by the look on her face, she had already made a firm decision, he said, closing his book. When the girl entered the room, he asked if she was okay, and sure enough, she didn't want to think it all over again. Catherine said that she felt that no matter how much she thought about it, she still couldn't find a better way, and she had already made up her mind. She then asked him to sign a contract with her. Cesare said that if she had already made up her mind, then that's what he would do. Catherine thought at that moment that he had agreed to it all too quickly. The man said there were still some things she needed to know before signing the contract. He came closer to her and told her that those who had made a contract with the devil and I would be able to break it, no matter how hard they tried, and she will be reborn time after time with the memories of her past life, until her soul is finally gone. He asked her if in the next life she thought her chances of being reborn as a human were high, or if she was far more likely to be reborn as an earthworm, or she may have been born a pine tree in a deserted forest. Can she endure the same boredom day after day? Or can she look at the same landscape with nothing to occupy her? At this point, Catherine thought it was unlikely that she would be able to endure something like this, and she was already starting to get nervous. Seeing the fear on her face, he said he was saying all this because he wanted her to think about these issues too before making a final decision. Catherine said she was told in lectures that someone who made a contract with the devil becomes part of his power after being eaten. Cesare said that only low-level idiots do that. You can no longer have any need for extra strength. Catherine said that he must be a very powerful demon. Olya motioned her over to the couch, and when she sat down he said he didn't even know what to say to that, then asked if she wanted a mint tea. When the girl agreed, she asked if she had told him she liked peppermint tea. As Cesare began to make tea, he said that she always drinks only tea. Catherine was very embarrassed at that moment. After a brief pause, she asked what he would do if she was an earthworm in her next life. Cesare replied that he would fill the whole room with good earth and take care of her until she died. Then the girl asked, "What would happen if I were to be reborn as a pine tree?" The guy replied that he would put her near the window in his office so she could see how his days were going. At that moment, she thought, is he really willing to go that far? She said she understood and laughed awkwardly. When he heard the laugh, he said that he was sincere after all. She replied that his sincerity put her in an even more awkward position. She thought Cesare was really polite. He wanted to make sure she knew what consequences she would face by making a contract with the devil. But she'd assumed she'd be perfectly fine with Cesare by her side, especially since, for the sake of preserving her life, she had nothing else to offer but her soul. So she told the man that her decision remained unchanged. So Catherine asked if they could make a contract. Then the man asked if she was sure she wouldn't regret it. The girl said she honestly doesn't have that confidence, but she wants to do it because there's no other way anyway. She held out her hand to him and told him to let them live in peace and harmony for the rest of their lives, Cesare looked at her and was surprised, asking, "For the rest of your life?" Said she had heard that it takes tens of centuries for a soul to completely disappear, and asked if that wasn't enough to use the phrase, "for the rest of my life." He smiled and said that sounded good. After that, he put his hand on her cheek. Then Catherine asked, "What is he talking about?" At that moment, Cesare moved toward her and kissed her gently on the lips. The girl certainly hadn't expected it. After what had happened, she returned home and tried to sleep. When she was lying in bed, she thought it was her room, but at some point she lost her senses. Cesare sat on the chair next to her and said that exchanging soul particles was one of the conditions for a full contract. He gave her as much of his soul as he himself absorbed, so for a brief moment there was darkness in her gaze. Catherine asked him, "Did you have to do the soul exchange process through a kiss?" Cesare turned a page in his book. Only then did he say that this is a custom among demons that has been passed down from ancient times from generation to generation, and asked, "Does she have any problems about it?" At this point she thought, divorced she is a race that honors tradition. Leova said there was no problem, just let him ask her opinion further, because having a contract doesn't mean they are in a relationship where they can kiss each other. Cesare said there was some truth in what she said, and he would behave with more restraint. Well, anyway, only 3 conditions need to be met for the contract to be fully finalized, including the exchange of souls, Cesare told her. And secondly, since he has decided to become the master of her soul rather than devour her, he needs to fulfill one of her most cherished wishes. She put her back to bed and said she'd give her 2 days, so let her think hard about what wish she wanted to make. Catherine said 2 days was too short. Cesare asked if she thought that if he added another day for reflection, it would help her better decide what her heart desperately craved. When Catherine tried to say something else, the man replied that when all conditions were met, she would belong to him forever, and they would develop a relationship that would be much stronger and deeper than blood ties. Catherine asked why he called Marjane by her first name, but addressed her by her last name. Cesare said there was no particular reason, and asked if she herself hadn't said he could address her sister simply by her first name. Catherine replied that in that case he could also address her by her first name. She asked him what he meant by saying that he intended to continue to address her in such a distant manner, saying that they would form a bond that would be stronger and deeper than the ties of blood. Cesare said he'd never thought of anything like that. Then he decided that it was hers, and he would call her by her first name. Catherine immediately asked that he then say her name right now. Cesare was surprised and questioned whether it was really necessary to say it right now. When the girl looked at him angrily and told him to hurry up, the man said, "And you're more stubborn than I thought, Catherine," and asked if she was satisfied. Catherine said that now she was very pleased, and let him always address her that way from now on. For their relationship is stronger and deeper than blood ties. The only thing that changed after she transferred her soul to Cesare was only that he started calling her by her first name. As one passage in demonology states, the older the demon, the more human it looks, and the older the demon, the closer it is to immortality. Therefore, to protect himself from the destructive influence of eternity, he periodically erases his memory, leaving only the most necessary information. So newly born, they are able to empathize with human emotions and assimilate them naturally. As Catherine tried to sleep, she wondered how long Cesare had lived. Catherine wondered if in a dozen centuries, when her soul was completely gone, he would erase all memories of her, leaving only the fact that she had made a contract with him. It made Catherine a little upset, but when she realized, she decided that she felt regret over it. The next morning, as Catherine sat in the parlor, the girl took out a piece of paper and remembered her sister's words. "Have you thrown away the paper on which I wrote the address of the hotel where I'm staying yet?" And she advised her sister to dip that piece of paper in lemon water. At that moment, Catherine thought that she had written something important, and it was good that the girl had not thrown that paper away. As she poured the lemon juice over the paper, she noticed that the letters were indeed showing. After a while, the letters revealed themselves, and she could read on the piece of paper, "Succession to the throne." Cesare approached her. "The struggle for the right of succession to the throne of Archduke Cesare is dangerous," he read, and said that's what it said on the piece of paper. The girl thanked him, because without him, she would never have read what was written on the piece of paper. Then suddenly she realized that he hadn't been here before, and asked when he had come. or rather since when he had been standing at her back. Cesare said he wasn't sure, but probably from the minute she started humming, "Let's try making lemon water." Catherine said she hadn't done anything like that, at which point, he took the note from her and asked who had given it to her. Catherine said it was Marjane, her younger sister, and asked if he remembered her. Cesare said it was the perky girl, and now he understood. Asked what exactly had become clear to him. The man explained that the one whom Miss Marjane was serving was Crown Prince Sephiran. Cesare is not on the best of terms with him, so he advised the girl to be careful. Now that he knows they know each other, he'll do everything he can to stop her. Catherine asked why his relationship with the Crown Prince was strained, and wondered if he might consider him his rival in love. Cesare explained that it was all because the Crown Prince had a passionate and fervent love for him. When Catherine heard this, she was shocked. The girl said that in any case, for the Archduke had nothing to do with them, so everything must be perfectly all right. Because Cesare just by pure coincidence has the same appearance and the same name as the Archduke. Catherine said that, for what it's worth, she thought she should go to Devon to help him clean up the garden. When Cesare heard this, he asked, "Isn't the garden still in order?" Catherine said it was because Devon was too lazy, and she didn't have the money to hire a gardener, so she sometimes helped him. Cesare asked if she had forgotten that she could make one wish for him in exchange for signing a contract with her, and asked why she wouldn't wish for a huge fortune or something. Catherine, but suddenly realized that she had been thinking about it ever since Cesare had mentioned granting her one wish, and she thought it would be hard to think of a more useful wish of hers than that. Then Catherine said that let it be her wish. Let him make sure that she would not be short of money for the rest of her days. Cesare agreed and told Lady Fani that she had now fulfilled 2 of the 3 conditions for making a contract with the devil. But when he was about to announce the 3rd condition, the girl interrupted him and said that they had agreed to call each other by their first names. He apologized and told Catherine that, one way or another, the contract wouldn't be finalized until she knew the devil's real name. Cesare explained that because demonic names had hidden power, they should be spoken with caution. Catherine asked him what his real name was, and that's when Cesare called his name, Leviathan. He explained that it was not a name that could pass carelessly from her lips, but in case of mortal danger, she could say it. No one would dare to mistreat her if they knew that he was her master. The girl said she understood. She thought that the name Leviathan sounded familiar to her. Catherine realized that the moment he'd said his real name, she'd felt as if countless small cuts had been made on her skin. Cesare was a more powerful devil than she'd thought. After a short silence, the man asked if it was time to start fulfilling her wish. Catherine was surprised and said that she needed to change her outfit. When he wanted to go after her, she told him to give her some time. She asked him if he was doing this to her on purpose. Cesare said of course not on purpose and laughed. Cesare said he would order a servant to be brought to her, so she would just have to wait a bit, and he would be back soon. Catherine replied that she was fine on her own, and she was just a bit seasick, so she would go and walk around the garden a bit. Cesare asked if she was sure she would be okay, and what would happen if she suddenly lost her way, because this mansion was much bigger than she thought. The girl asked if he thought she was that stupid. The man replied that he didn't think so, and if she got lost he could easily find her. But Catherine replied that she had already told him she wouldn't get lost. After that she went outside and didn't understand why Cesare was getting more and more rowdy. She asked for a chance to change her clothes. She wondered if he'd noticed she was agitated and cared for her in that way. She wondered if he'd noticed her agitation and cared for her in that way. But then she thought nothing of the sort, and let her not be mistaken about him, and he only treats her well because she is his contractor. Catherine thought that maybe she should look around a bit and didn't know where to start. But she would like to see the shipyard outside the mansion at least once. Even from there it looked huge, and she wondered just how big it really was. As she passed by some gates of the mansion, she realized that there seemed to be other guests in the mansion besides her. She looked at the people and realized they were cardinals. She didn't realize the people were from the papal curia in Cesare's mansion. Then suddenly one of the cardinals looked at the girl and said that she was a devil, and how dare she enter there with her foot. When the girl heard this, she wondered why he called her a deviless. But she questioned whether they were saying it to her or not. One of the men asked if there were any demons here besides her. At that moment, she thought to begin with, the owner of this mansion, Cesare, who is the devil. She apologized but said it seemed they were mistaken about her. But the cardinal interrupted her and asked her if she was going to be silent. How dare she build herself up in front of him, and what bad intentions had brought her there? She thought that words wouldn't help, but she did not know what to do. Suddenly a man came up to her and she heard him ask, "Are you senile, or have you gone mad?" Cesare came over to her and put his arm around her shoulder and said that it looked like he had both. The cardinal said that the archduke should cultivate a reverence for their church. It was all to blame that he had begun to serve the emperor directly and had become mired in corruption, but relying on the Holy See. At that moment, Cesare interrupted him and told him that this was a young lady, his guest, and he was not going to waste his time listening to any nonsense. He also asked them to state the purpose of their visit to his residence. The cardinal said that the strongest archmage on the continent couldn't help but see the devilish right in front of his nose. And he said the archduke was clearly being deceived, and in remembrance of former times he would not allow him to be tempted by the devil. Then he told his assistants to get ready and pointed to the girl. Catherine thought that if Cesare was around, maybe she should just stand there silently and do nothing. But right now, it was more important that she was hungry, and she thought that maybe she should offer to take him out to breakfast. Catherine turned to the man and asked about today's breakfast menu. When she saw his face, she didn't understand why he was watching these people with such seriousness. The cardinal said that Saint Gabriella had ordered the bark of the demons, so there was nothing to stop him from opening the sacred seal. And he told his assistants to get started already, and they pronounced the 7th chapter of the sacred seal of Hamael. At that moment, a blue circle of some kind appeared under Cesare and Catherine's feet. When the girl saw it, she assumed that because she was very nervous, she felt a slight dizziness. But then she realized that it was not because of nerves. She began to feel that the earth beneath her feet had become very hot. After that, she turned to Cesare and asked, "Can this magic circle harm a person too?" The man said that in no way was the Holy Seal a spell that only worked on demons and monsters. He said that even though the sensation was not pleasant, he had to be patient a little longer. If she dared to escape, she would be recognized as a demon, and she would be a target for the papal curia. Catherine said she felt like she was standing on hot coals. Cesare looked at the girl and said, "L'amore." At that moment, he lifted Catherine up, and that magic circle that had been there evaporated. The cardinals immediately started asking the archduke what he was doing, and they asked him to recall this demon immediately, because if the papal curia found out. But Cesare interrupted him and told them not to worry, and he would personally tell the Pope about today's incident and demand an apology. And on top of that, he told the cardinal that he had dared to use a spell on his land without permission, and maybe he should kick him out of the mansion in just his underwear. When the cardinal answered nothing, Cesare ordered the demon L'amore to clear his mansion of useless trash. At this moment, the huge whale flew straight at the cardinals, opening its mouth and roaring loudly. When evening came, Catherine went back to her house and thought that, as expected, her house was the best in the world. But then she realized that she hadn't had a poppy seed in her mouth since that morning, so she was very hungry. Cesare followed her into the mansion and asked if Catherine's legs were okay. He also apologized for having to see such an inappropriate picture. He doesn't even know how best to apologize. Catherine said it was all right. He hadn't expected it to turn out this way. She asked if he had better tell her if those coordinates were dead. Cesare replied that they were pathetic nobodies who weren't worthy of him getting his hands dirty over them, and L'amore had just spit them out on one of the islands nearby. Catherine said that it appeared that the sacred relic that had not been used was a fake, but the man said it wasn't at all, and it was real. When Catherine heard this, she was surprised and asked why they thought she was the devil, and he himself was not. Cesare explained that a low-level sacred being like Gabriel was incapable of revealing his true nature, and honestly, there was no way he expected her to be mistaken for a demon. He suggested that it must be the influence of the abyss near where she was. Catherine was surprised and asked what abysses meant. Cesare explained that Eden, or the passageway between the human and demonic worlds, people also call it the demon summoning circle. Every original demon has it, and this mansion is proof of that. Catherine said that she had heard about it, and that the magic circle in the basement was nothing more than a demon summoning circle. She now realized why things were so strange in her house. Cesare asked her, "You say you heard about it from someone?" He doesn't know who that person is, but she'd better stay away from him, because there is nothing good about knowing someone who is close to the devil and yet very talkative. Catherine said that he had nothing to worry about because her mother had died when she was still a little girl, but when he heard that, he fell silent. Catherine thought that somehow there was an awkward silence in the air, and she assumed that her answer had been too abrupt. But at that moment, Cesare got down on his knee and handed her a white rose, telling her that if she placed it by her bed, she could have the dream she wanted. For example, she could see her late mother. The man said that the flower will not wither until its life cycle comes to an end, thus asking her to forgive him for such carelessly thrown words. Catherine said his words didn't hurt her at all, and thanked him for his concern. Cesare said he had something else to give her, and at that moment he took an envelope out of his pocket. When the girl asked what it was, Cesare explained that it was an invitation to a banquet. It was certainly not some grand social gathering, so let her not feel burdened by anything. Catherine asked why he was giving her that. He took her hand and said it was, of course, for her to attend this banquet with him. He kissed her hand and motioned for her to respond affirmatively to his invitation, looking at her with a pitying gaze. After these words, Cesare returned to the Archduke's residence. Catherine, to whom so much had happened, was so exhausted that she could not even open the bag of money Cesare had given her. It was not until late at night that she regained her strength. She sat by the mirror and thought that she had not expected to sleep until so late in the night, when she had decided to lie down for a while because she felt tired. At that moment she heard some scraping at the window. When she turned her head, she saw Miałkolka. He asked where she had gone early in the morning. Catherine opened the window and apologized, asking if he was hungry. She explained that she needed to get something from Cesare, so she'd gone to his mansion. The cat said while he waited for her to return, his stomach stuck to his spine. She took him in her arms and told him that she would use the money Cesare gave her to buy him lots of goodies, so don't let him get too mad. She offered to look together to see how much money there was. The cat said that if she bought him some delicious meat and a diamond bowl, he would forgive her. She agreed to his terms. After that, they went to the bag with the money. When the cat looked inside, she said that Cesare had cheated her, because it wasn't money, it was just papers. But when Catherine looked at it, she said they weren't just pieces of paper, but blank checks guaranteed by the Imperial Bank. Looking in her bag, she thought to herself, besides, half of the checks were backed by Queen's Bank guarantees, so they could be used even in countries where Imperial banknotes were not accepted. The bag looked rather small, so Catherine had a strong belief that it would be a small sum of money, but she hadn't expected to see something like this. When Catherine picked up the envelope and started to print it out, the cat asked why there were strange drawings on that piece of paper. Catherine explained that it wasn't a blank check, but an invitation to a banquet. When she pulled the invitation from inside, she read that it was a lavish party aboard the ship, an exclusive ticket for VIP guests only. There was a display of the finest furniture on a luxury liner. When Catherine saw all this, she fainted with amazement. The highest measure of luxury enjoyed by the high nobility and capitalists is a magnificent liner. Usually, famous luxury cruise liners carry only the best brands of their time. And when it comes to the Archduke Christopher's luxury liner, there's sure to be an exhibition of the most high-end furniture brands on board. When Catherine woke up, she thought that now she had an important mission, to fill the empty mansion with furniture, taking advantage of Cesare's wealth. The girl realized that she had to go there, even if the heavens unfolded, and she had to buy up everything there with his money. When morning came, Miałpok was sitting on the window, and told Catherine that he was saying this because she might not know, but Cesare had come to the mansion a couple minutes ago. When Catherine heard this, she was surprised. She realized that she had to get out of bed and get dressed immediately to go out to see him. When she did, she came down to him. Cesare, seeing the girl, said that today his wait had been prolonged for a full 20 minutes. Catherine asked what kind of man he was, and if he came, let him report it. She wondered if he might be enjoying himself for waiting for her. Cesare said that sounds pretty romantic and let them keep that option. When the girl took a closer look at Cesare, she said that today his splendor was dazzling and asked what was wrong. The man said he was happy to hear that, and today he was going to go to a banquet with her. So after a long time he decided to pay attention to his appearance. Catherine didn't understand what he was saying, Then Cesare asked if she hadn't printed out the invitation he had given her the other day. Boarding the ship would begin in exactly 3 hours. The girl said she'd read it, but had been busy organizing the finances he'd given her the whole time, so had completely forgotten about the banquet. Catherine didn't know what to do. She hadn't prepared a suitable dress for going out. Cesare said that of course he had seen that coming, so he had prepared everything. Catherine asked what he meant, but at that moment the girls came into her mansion and told her not to worry and they would personally handle her packing. When Catherine saw them, she realized they were maids from the Archduke's residence. They took the lady by the hands and said that they would get her cleaned up in no time. One of them said that she had waited a long time for this day to come. Catherine didn't understand where they were taking her, and asked for Cesare to help her with it. When the girls had gone, after a while one of the maids said, "My goodness, madam, there is no color that does not suit you. If I had known that, I would have brought a couple of other colors with me." As Catherine was wearing her new dress, the maid asked if she felt any discomfort anywhere. Catherine said the dress fit perfectly, but she was surprised because she hadn't even been measured. The girl explained that they had an eye for such matters, and they only needed to look at her a couple of times to choose the right size. But at that moment, Roz came into the room and told her to let them start looking for her next time, before the mistress visited, and she would give them the exact parameters. The other maid said they would definitely do that next time, and Catherine didn't understand why everyone seemed so enthusiastic. The maid said that she still dared to ask, for she was the first whom His Highness the Archduke cared for as his beloved. Catherine asked if that was true. The maid replied that of course it was true, which was why their hearts were fluttering with excitement. She asked that if Catherine became an archduchess, that they be allowed to take them as their personal servants. At that moment the girl thought that there must have been a great misunderstanding about her. While Catherine was getting ready for the cruise, then Cesare's assistant said that any way you look at it, he had too much business piling up, so he probably shouldn't accompany him to the banquet. He said that when he and Miss Catherine returned from their week-long cruise, a fully landscaped garden would be waiting for him. Devon asked Cesare if he was listening to him or not. The man looked at Devon carefully and said he didn't believe his words one bit. But at that moment Catherine came out to them and said that if everything he was saying was true, then why was the garden, which could be tidied up in a week, now in such a bad state? Devon said he was a little busy, but when Cesare saw the girl, he said that, as expected, the green shade suited her very well. He turned to Catherine and said that she said she was coming from a titled family, and he suggested that she was most likely not given a pass by the scions of noble lords. Catherine said that of course there had been such cases, even those who had such a crush on her that they wept, begging to meet her. Devon turned to Lady Fanny and asked if she really couldn't change her mind. Though she looks at him as a crazy youngster, he is actually a very famous knight. As a consequence, there are many with whom he doesn't get along. Catherine told him to stop looking for excuses, and to take Miawalka and get in the other carriage. And also that he should remember to tell Rose that she was granting her a week's vacation. When Catherine climbed into the carriage, she said it had taken too long to get ready, and asked what would happen if at this rate they were late for boarding. Cesare said nothing like that would happen, and the drive to the harbor would only take 10 minutes. Catherine was surprised and asked why the trip would take so little time. Then the man explained that it was not a horse-drawn carriage, but a magical machine that had been manufactured in the west of the empire. It was much faster and safer to travel without a horse, using the Mana Stone as an engine. When Catherine looked out, she saw that there was indeed no coachman or horses. Cesare said that's also one of the reasons why Crown Prince Sephiron loves him so much that he wants to kill him. The girl asked if he was referring to the magic machine. The fellow said he had, and explained that he had bought out all the trading rights to them in the East, and had also heard that the prince had come to such a frenzy that he was sick to his stomach. Catherine asked why he was telling her all this. Cesare explained that knowing how much wealth and power he possessed would help her use that power more effectively. A girl asked him, seducing some girl, what he usually says to that effect. She thinks anyone would be charmed. Cesare looked at her carefully and asked her then what it meant that she was now enchanted with him. Catherine became embarrassed and said it was a question she had no need to answer. The man said that he wished she did. Just as Cesare had said, the carriage, that is, the magical car, was moving very fast, making it take 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes to get there. They were not late for boarding, and thankfully, Catherine was able to leave the magic machine before Cesare would have started making obvious fun of her. When Catherine got out of the car, she said the liner was very large and you couldn't even see the edge. Cesare says he'll go check in for boarding with Glenn and she'll wait for now. Have him here with Devon, Catherine agreed. Afterward, she told Devon that they had come to rest, so don't let him look at her with that unhappy face. Devon said that for him, this trip is just like work. He asked if they had to bring Meow Talk with them. He said that they would have to spend a whole week on the Lilith, and asked what to do if there were any problems because they had brought a monster with them on the ship. Catherine said it was fine, and just in case, she and Meow Cat practiced the pretend to be a doll skill. The cat said that if there were no people around who were allergic to monsters, no one would know about him for sure. Devon asked if there was such an allergy at all and added that he was in favor of something weird. But at that moment, a man passing by sneezed violently. Catherine wondered if there was a monster around. When he saw Catherine, he apologized for appearing so inappropriately before the noble lady. Catherine said it was okay and asked him to ignore it. Then asked what he had said a second ago about the monsters. The man said he's just allergic to them, and if a monster shows up nearby, he immediately starts sneezing like crazy. The man said that she didn't have to worry because there would be priests from the papal curia on the ship. Even if a monster appeared on the liner, they would take care of the problem instantly. The man said that he wished them to enjoy this last journey, and that it was time for him to go. Catherine wished him the same. But it was the phrase, last journey, that bothered her. She asked Devon if he'd heard what the stranger had said. He said she probably looked like a commoner who had managed to get on the ship by pure chance. He looked away and added that Cesare seemed to be coming back. When Cesare approached, he apologized for keeping her waiting so long and asked if they could board. As they boarded, they heard an announcement that first-class passengers should use the gangway on the other side, and second- and third-class passengers would have to wait a bit. As they passed the people in line, Catherine and Cesare heard one of the girls say that it was His Highness, Archduke Christopher, and he looked even more handsome in person. Some people began to whisper in the crowd and expressed surprise that they didn't expect to see His Highness so close. But no one understood who she was. The lady who was beside him. At this point, Catherine thought it was exhausting to have everyone's attention not only on Cesare, but on her as well. Catherine approached Cesare and asked if he could fulfill her request. Cesare agreed and said he would do anything for her. She asked if by chance he could change her appearance with magic for the time they would be on the liner. She explained that she thought there were a lot of people there who were hostile to her, and she didn't want any unnecessary rumors. Cesare said that she was saying very interesting things, but if that was what she wished, so be it. Catherine added that she wasn't actually joking, and his reaction surprised her. The man said it wasn't that he didn't take her at her word at all, but that no one in this world was in a position to cause them trouble. He said she had him, so she didn't need to worry about such useless things. Despite Catherine's best efforts to hide her hard-beating heart, it was noticeable. The ear-splitting roar and sound of the sea, the receding shore, the people waving goodbye, and the people next to Catherine. The roar and sound of the sea, the distant shore, the people waving goodbye, and the people next to her. Catherine thought it was a very different feeling from the day she had left the Orleans residence. She really did feel kind of strange now. At that moment, Cesare came up to her and threw her coat over her shoulders, smiling. As expected, she had done the right thing by contracting with Cesare. When they went to the room, Catherine took a bath. Cesare asked how she was feeling, and she admitted that she did feel like Catherine Fani. The girl explained that it wasn't surprising, as she had only taken a bath with the potion he had given her and had changed so much. Looking at herself in the mirror, Catherine thanked him, but the man said it wasn't worth a thank you. She asked if she could do something like that if she studied magic. Cesare said that magic is a science that requires talent and hard work, but she has potential, and if she tries to master magic, he thinks she has a bright future ahead of her. The girl asked if he meant that she would be able to solve any problems with his money. Cesare said that thought was also true, but what he meant was that she could safely use his magic or use the services of his subordinates. After the journey, he will reveal to her ways to use the demons and monsters he owns. Knowing her, he's sure Catherine will learn these skills quickly. When the girl asked him if he was telling the truth, Cesare said of course, and that he never lied to her. Then he took out a pendant and began to hang it around her neck. He explained that it was a royal pendant. Cesare thought it would be better to give Catherine the pendant than to provide cash. Royal pendants are a guaranteed status and a piece of ownership in the imperial bank. Such pendants are only issued to the upper class, and with this pendant, one can handle any financial matters even without carrying cash and jewelry. Catherine said she was grateful for such a valuable gift, but asked if she really needed to use the pendant. Cesare said that yes, that was why he had given it to her. Catherine thought that the thought of one day holding a royal pendant that she had only heard about could never have even crossed her mind. But to be precise, it was an item she had received in exchange for her life. Although there are many things in the world that you can't get even by putting your life on the line, Catherine thought she shouldn't complain. Catherine asked what she should say if others started asking what their relationship was and why she had been given the royal pendant. Cesare told her to answer as she saw fit, because she could be whatever she wanted to him. In the evening, when Catherine went outside, she thought the deck was contentedly quiet. She supposed it was probably because everyone was getting ready for the party, and she was right to go out. Cesare said he had some things to take care of before the party started. Catherine decided that she should look around for a while. Suddenly Miaukalka came out of her bag and said that the wind was very refreshing. The girl agreed with her and added that the ship was sailing much faster than she had thought. Just then someone came up to her and told her that the ship had just sped up to get out into the open ocean sooner. When Catherine looked at him questioningly, he wondered if she wasn't talking to him and chattering to herself. The girl asked why he cared if she was talking to herself or not. Inner monologue. Where did he come from? His dazzling beauty makes me feel uncomfortable. She also asked the man if he knew her, and why he was talking to her informally. Catherine added that he shouldn't behave so tactlessly with someone he was meeting for the first time. The man said she just suddenly spoke to him informally, so he thought they knew each other. He apologized and said that he must have ruined her mood. Indeed, if he happened to cross paths with a beauty like her, he would definitely not forget her. This guy thought. She told the young man that she too apologized for carelessly calling him a man, and said goodbye. But the boy asked her to wait because he wanted to ask her something, and asked if there might be some mystery to her birth. When Catherine heard that, she asked what he was saying that was. The stranger told her not to be so careful. He was just glad to meet her. He then added that people like them can feel for each other to some extent, and asked if that should be called a sense of camaraderie. After that, he pulled out a piece of paper and said it was his business card. He wasn't some strange man, so he just wanted them to meet and talk. When Catherine picked up his piece of paper, she immediately begged off and said that if he was already trying to fool someone, why not come up with something more believable? Catherine added that he had wasted a lot of her time because of him, and she still had a lot of things to do, so she turned around and started to leave. The stranger shouted back at her, telling her not to be stubborn and to talk to him. But the girl didn't listen to him anymore. Catherine wondered what his words meant about people like us and the mystery of birth. Despite the fact that she does not intend to listen to the stories of that crook, she cannot get rid of the oppressive feeling in her soul. When Catherine returned to the room, she met Devon on the way, who asked where she had gone alone. And it seemed that she had already managed to forget Mr. Cesare's words, about the fact that despite her relationship to Cesare and Devon, he must accompany her everywhere as a bodyguard. He asked that if something happened to her while she was walking alone, how she would order her to face her lord afterwards. Catherine said that she had just stepped out on deck for a while to look around and get some fresh air. Devon then asked why she was frowning. The girl explained that it was because she had met a strange man. She realized that she should have turned him down from the beginning, but somehow he pissed her off a lot. Devon said that was why she needed to take him with her. If he had been there, he would have already thrown any strange people who tried to approach her overboard. Catherine smiled and said that was right. That was right, and she would definitely take him with her next time. Then she asked Devon if he could talk to her for a while. Catherine said he could choose any topic of conversation he wanted. The boy hesitated and said that he was actually the bastard son of Prince Chebok. When Catherine heard that, she said just no flat jokes like that. But Devon said he wasn't joking at all. It's just that few people treat him as a bastard nowadays. But before anyone tells her about it, he decided to reveal the facts of his birth to her beforehand. Catherine asked who was going to tell her about it, and she asked casually if His Highness Prince Chebok was not aboard this liner. Devon said he wasn't here, but there would be plenty of people on board who wouldn't mind washing their hands of him. That's why he said he didn't want to go aboard the ship, but she pretended not to listen to him. At that moment, Catherine thought she'd just decided that he wanted to rest. She couldn't even think of having that kind of history, and it turns out that Devon was having a hard time living with it too. When Devon shared his story with Catherine from beginning to end, she got the feeling that the fact that he was born into the imperial family was not such a big secret in his opinion. Among the flow of his words, there were also facts that Catherine was not particularly interested in, and which made her uncomfortable, but thanks to that, her mood, which had been quite bad, returned to its original state again, and in the process she was able to get information about the imperial family of Iteran. But suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted their pleasant conversation. When Catherine said they could go into their room, Cesare came in and asked if she was ready to enjoy the party. The girl replied that of course she was ready. Catherine said he should know that she was going to be his apprentice for a while. Cesare said she could do as she wished, but asked if there was a specific reason she had chosen to be his apprentice. Devon also asked if there was some special reason why she wanted to hide the fact that she was Mr. Cesare's lover. Catherine thought that she wasn't really his lover, but Devon said what a fool he was, that publicizing her relationship with His Highness the Archduke would cause her a lot of trouble. Ignoring her aide, Catherine said that she thought the public would react most calmly to her being his student. Cesare said that she did make a smart decision, because the attention being directed at her too must be very tiring. Catherine told him not to worry because when it comes to banquets she can do anything. As soon as they came down the stairs, all the people immediately started looking at them, Catherine, though she said there was nothing to worry about. But there were curious looks at her from all sides. Suddenly a man approached them and addressed His Majesty Cesare. It was Chancellor Cole Sanders, and he congratulated him heartily on his successful victory over the evil dragon. Cole was immensely glad that after a whole year he had the chance to meet him again. Cesare said that the Chancellor must be living well, for his face had grown so round. Cole ignored his remark and asked who was next to His Majesty. When Cesare wanted to answer, the girl immediately interrupted him. She said to him, "It is a pleasure to meet His Lordship, and she is Anne Marjane, apprentice to His Highness Cesare." The Chancellor said that this is terrific news because 5 years ago, His Highness said that he would not take anyone on as a student. He introduced himself and said that he was very happy to meet her. Cole said that the news that His Highness the Archduke had agreed to train someone for the first time would make all the geniuses of the Empire turn green with envy. Catherine said she continues to worry that she won't be able to live up to His Highness's expectations. After saying that, she whispered that Cesare should have given her advance warning that he refused to train anyone. But he told her to ignore it, because there shouldn't be any problems. Cole asked the girl how long she had been trained in His Highness Cesare's magic. Catherine answered that it had been about 2 months. But as she looked to the side, she saw the silhouette of a man from the back, and he seemed very familiar. When she looked more closely, she realized it was Parzival. But Catherine didn't understand what he was doing on the ship. When Parzival turned around, she wondered why she had looked that way. He notices something like that right away, doesn't he? The girl realized that if she left the banquet hall right away, she would only attract even more attention. But she didn't understand what to do. Suddenly there was music, and Catherine realized it was the only way. Then she turned to His Highness the Archduke and asked if he would allow him to give her one dance, and she herself thought that by twirling in the dance, she would be the only way to distance herself from Parzival. When people saw them start dancing, everyone was whispering, saying it was a great view, and they seemed to be seeing His Highness the Archduke dancing with a girl for the first time. At this point, Catherine thought she had screwed up, because now there were even more eyes on her than before. But her outer appearance had been altered with magic, so she assumed no one would recognize her. When Cesare looked at her, he asked if she was thinking about something else while dancing with him and said it made him very upset. Catherine apologized and said she was just a little tired. Cesare said he understands her perfectly because Chancellor Cole Sanders, even in the capital, is known for talking a lot. But Catherine said that's not the reason. It's because the people around her have so many questions for her, and she's worried that any of her answers might put him in a difficult position. Cesare said she shouldn't worry about something like that, and just let her do what she wanted to do. Catherine said that he said that as if he knew what she intended to do here. The man said he was pretty sure she wouldn't run around the banquet hall waving the crown prince's underwear. The girl said she would never do anything like that. Cesare replied that he was just giving it as an example. Catherine asked if she could be the first to leave the banquet hall and return to her quarters. Cesare said she could certainly go and rest and think about what kind of story she wanted to get into. He also added that what a pity of a soul, he would have liked to leave with her too. But there were still too many people left that he needed to talk to. Afterward, he gently kissed her hand and told her to remember to take Devon with her. After that, he said they would meet at night. When Catherine heard this, she was shocked. She didn't understand what "at night" meant. As they left the banquet hall, Devon said he was curious to know how she had struck up an affair with Mr. Cesare. Catherine figured they weren't in this relationship, and nothing would change in the future either, no matter how much she said. Her words seemed as if no one could hear her. Devon said he knows him to be a man who knows no such meaning as love and has mercury flowing in his veins instead of blood. Catherine said he was not such a cold man, but the guy said that actually Cesare is the realest icebreaker ever, and asked if she took his side because she's in a relationship with him. Catherine said that he was just suffering nonsense day in and day out, which was why he looked like such a cold person in his eyes. And she asked Devon if he'd just seen Parzival in the banquet hall. Devon was surprised and asked if he was there because he hadn't noticed. He said it was possible, though, because the owner of the ship was Parzival's older brother. When Catherine heard this, she was very surprised. The guy asked if she didn't know, and he guessed everything, why she was in such an elevated mood. Devon says that's not the end of it, because the ship is full of bastards from the papal curia. Because that's where the reason the paladins kept their way through Christopher lies. Catherine thought the owner of the face was Parzival's older brother, Jenner Feinrichen. It's the same as walking on your own feet into a tiger's den. Catherine asked if all those paladins who had paid a visit to her mansion were on board. Devon said that he thought that was the case because, when it comes to paladins, they are all greedy for worldly fame and riches. Suddenly people came up behind them and said, "Who's this here, Devon Rodenin?" When they turned around, they saw people in front of them. One of the guys said he wasn't mistaken. It was the same idiot from their first night corps. Catherine looked at them carefully and realized that not only the representatives of the papal curia had come aboard, but the imperial knights as well. She thought it was hard to make a bad impression with such smarmy faces, but they managed. She asked him if he had been suspended because he had made a mistake somewhere, and asked him if he was now a part-time bodyguard. She also asked if he became an imperial knight for fun. He doesn't ask anything, though, because everyone already knows who is a disgrace to the Iteran Empire. Devon said he'd better start withering soon, so he suggested that Mistress just leave. Said bastards like that weren't worth their attention. As they started to leave, the guy shouted, "You're ignoring us, you bastard who hasn't even been taught manners. Then why don't you resign your knightly duties and just start trading your body like you're doing now?" He said that perhaps for a child out of wedlock like him, this way of supporting himself was a much better option. Catherine said that talking to a fellow officer, they had crossed the line. Devon apologized to his mistress and told her to return to her quarters first. The guy asked if he was going to hit them and also if he knew what the place was. But before he could finish, he was punched in the face and shouted that he was an idiot who didn't even think about the consequences. Devon said they must have missed his fist, because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten on his nerves. If it was about him, he could tolerate it, but he wouldn't let them insult his mistress. Catherine thought she probably should have stopped it all. But then suddenly another man came up to them and said there were too many eyes here. Addressing Devon, he told them to stop holding this fool by the pecs and stand up. He said that any act detrimental to the honor of imperial knights and society would be severely punished. Therefore, he would report the incident to the commander. Catherine wondered why Devon hadn't told her about the humiliation he was enduring from his co-workers. She assumed that they were keeping him quiet to prevent the situation from getting out of hand, as it did now. She realized that this was clearly group bullying, and she couldn't stand to watch him being ignored in silence. So she moved closer and said it was nice to meet you. Catherine said she would like to speak to her employer, Sir Devon. Her name is Anne Marjane, and she actually has something to say about the current situation. The man who had recently arrived said it was a pleasure to meet him, and that he was a knight of the First Corps of Imperial Knights, Kalian. He did not know exactly what had happened, but if she wished to make a complaint, have her contact the Imperial Knights Secretariat. Catherine said no, as His Highness Cesare's only student she could not bear such an insult. It was at that moment that he noticed the royal pendant on her. Catherine said that she would report the incident to His Majesty, and make sure that the perpetrators received the punishment they deserved for the insult they had not given her. The guy who just got beaten up said it was all bullshit, and His Highness the Archduke doesn't take anyone as his apprentice. Catherine said that the knight told Sir Devon to sell her his body. She had never been so insulted in her entire life. She thinks His Highness the Archduke will understand how upset she feels. When the knight tried to say something to the effect that if she kept saying this nonsense, she would only embarrass herself even more, he was immediately slapped in the face. The Knight of the First Corps told the man to be quiet and kneeled down now, begging Lady Anne Marjane for forgiveness. Then he stepped closer to the girl and told her that it was his fault for not training him properly, and asked that she only deliver the gist of the matter to His Highness. Catherine said that seeing him apologize fervently, she would not discuss the matter. But he should apologize to Devon too, because insulting her bodyguard Devon is an insult to her. It's like insulting His Highness Cesare. That's why she said they better watch what they say. When they got back to their room, Catherine said that neither the Order of Imperial Knights nor the secular society seemed to be able to behave normally. She got the feeling that neither place had people living in it. She asked if this is how grown-ups should behave. It's childish for a whole crowd to bully one person. She told Devon not to tolerate this kind of attitude in the future. If he was going to let his fists come in, he would strike as soon as he came face to face with an ill-wisher. Devon said that if he had been alone, he would have done so at once. But now that he was in debt to Mr. Cesare, he should be careful. In that moment, she thought he was grateful to the man who had hired him as a slave. But still, he was grateful to his mistress. The first time in his life someone had ever stood up for him like that. Catherine didn't know whether to call Devon a holy naivete or an idiot. Then suddenly Catherine remembered his words when he had stood up for her, and realized that he had been the first to fight back. Devon said that he seemed to have a crush on her, but Catherine replied that she had figured it out and was going to bed, so she asked him to step outside. She said goodnight to him. And when he left, she thought that Devon didn't seem at all bothered by the fact that he'd parted from his fellow officer on a bad note. After that she lay on the bed and was so tired. All this time she was excited because it was such a long-awaited trip, but on the first day, she happened to cross paths with too many people. In retrospect, it is safe to say that the journey started very strangely. First there was a not particularly pleasant phone call, then an encounter with a stranger who mentioned something like the secret of her birth, and finally an argument with knights devoid of the spirit of chivalry. Of course, among everything that has happened, the strangest thing on Catherine today was Parzival. He is a strange man in his own right, but there was no way she expected to run into him even on the ship. If Catherine had been alone, she would surely have been in great danger, but luckily she had Cesare by her side. But she still didn't understand what he'd said about meeting at night. She thought it shouldn't mean that she should wait for him, because Catherine was so sleepy. She thought she would lie there with her eyes closed for a while, and then get up right away. When she got up, she would change her clothes and wash off her makeup as well. When she opened her eyes, she didn't realize where she was. But there was a lot of water around her, so she assumed she was in the sea. And she realized it was just a dream. But it was amazing to her how realistic he was. Catherine felt no fear, no aversion. On the contrary, she felt somehow at ease, as if someone were gently embracing her. Someone suddenly, as a dolphin swam up to her, said her name. Then Catherine asked if it was Cesare. He said she had great intuition, and that's because she can nullify magic. He used a spell to invite her into his dream. Strictly speaking, they met in a very deep and distant sea of reality. She asked why he was in dolphin form. Cesare said it was a very comfortable way to be in this place, and she didn't seem to know that she looked exactly the same. When she looked at herself, she asked since when her appearance had changed. Cesare said since the beginning. If she didn't like it, it could easily be fixed. Catherine said it was fine. She was fine with everything. As they swam, Cesare asked her if she was making good use of the royal pendant. The girl said that the story had reached his ears. He replied that rumors spread at the speed of light in society. Catherine said she was a little angry that some of the imperial knights here were being too dismissive of Devon. She said I knew she was the reason he was in such a difficult situation. But Cesare said it was nothing like that. She shouldn't dwell on it. because if she was caught off guard by such trivialities, the Leviathan's pride would disappear. Demons are a race of power seekers and pleasure seekers. It's worth noting that power here includes pride, and Cesare is glad she knows how to use the power of his name. Every time he says he doesn't care what she does when they meet, she starts to have fears about the future. Because Catherine can't help but think that she's going to become an arrogant person who uses his power and does whatever she wants. The girl asked if he had called her into his dream to talk about it. Cesare said no, and he thought about sharing his knowledge of magic with her. Cesare added that he'd noticed that she harbored an interest in magic. Catherine said that she was very interested in the subject. Catherine said that, in general, she was always up for this kind of thing, and asked where they should start. Cesare said that since they'd met, he'd never seen her act so active. He's sorry to break her expectations. There's no way she's going to get anything done right now. When Catherine asked why, he said it was because it's time to wake up. And at that moment she opened her eyes, finding herself on her bed. She realized it was morning. After a while she pulled herself together and told Devon that today was a very important day. Because you could say that the purchases made at this furniture show determine the value of their home. Devon asked if she was going to buy a nice bed, and the meow cat, who was sitting in the bag, said she should get him a food bowl too. Well, Catherine showed her pendant and said it wasn't a problem for her. When she came to the fair, all the vendors immediately came up to her. Said he had a soft bed that made her fall asleep as soon as she lay down. Said he had a food bowl that would make her drool just looking at it. When they passed by the antiques department, she said that no matter how you looked at it, they were clearly items for summoning demons. But any house was bound to have useless and expensive furnishings. After a very long time, Devon collapsed on the floor and said that shopping was a very exhausting process. Told him not to be a wuss and they weren't done yet. As they passed another department, she saw a fancy bed. She thought it was a bed, beyond any doubt, the luxury of the bed world. The best from Ludfong Cherry Pick. And she should definitely buy it. When she approached the salesman, she said that she would like to buy this bed. But a man interrupted her and said that he wanted to buy it. When Catherine heard that voice, she realized it was very familiar to her. But when she looked up and recognized the man, she wondered what kind of ruse he had come up with this time. The guy said she was exaggerating and he only wanted to buy a bed. It was the same stranger who had approached her on the deck. Catherine said she was the first one here, so she should order first. But the man interrupted her and said that he was actually the first to arrive. The salesperson interrupted them and said that the orders for these items were closed, so only the showcase sample was left, and the next order could be placed in a year. The man said it was okay. He was just about to buy a window sample. Catherine said she was also going to buy the product on display. He said that before placing the order, maybe she could first ask what kind of bed it was in the first place. She replied that it was the bed his late mother used. If not, she didn't see, anywhere, any reason to concede the purchase to him. The girl then turned to Devon and asked why he was standing there and wouldn't say something to him. But when the guy didn't say anything back, she asked what was wrong with him and thought that no matter how much she shook him, he didn't even move. You could tell he was completely hardened. She realized it was as if time had stopped. And as she looked around, she realized that it wasn't just her assistants. All the people in the exhibition had frozen. The stranger said to her, "Mother, then, well said. I think I asked you a question yesterday, it seems. Didn't you ever think you had some sort of birth secret?" Catherine turned around and asked if it was all his hands. But he didn't listen to her and said what about the possibility that one of her parents was a great wizard. Catherine thought that he was absolutely not going to listen to what he was being told. She absolutely must get out of there and find Cesare. The guy said that someone who doesn't age, that no matter how much time passes and probably never dies. At that moment he swung his knife, which he held in his hand, and black smoke appeared from the bed. The man said that first of all she should know that the culprit was not him. The culprit was this bed, or rather, hiding in this bed, madame, and at that moment, the silhouette of a woman appeared from the bed. Catherine thought it was a demoness, and she couldn't believe that she had been hiding in the bed's upholstery all this time. But when she looked into her eyes, she realized they weren't purple. Catherine didn't know what to do. The man put her behind his back and told them to stop their exhausting quarrel and make things clear between them as soon as possible. Said he, "Madame Pompadour." He told her to choose whether she would follow him or close her eyes here once and for all. The Deviless replied to him, "Are you telling me that if I don't listen, you'll kill me? I'm only a couple decades younger than you, and you're already trying to twist ropes out of me." At that moment, Catherine thought he was 20 years older than this creature, yet he looked very young. She didn't understand who these people were. The man replied to the woman that without them, she would be a living disaster in this country. The end of unstable Nephilim like her was predestined. He said it was fine. She didn't have to choose him specifically. But why not find an owner through contracting? A Nephilim is a hybrid of a demon and a human. Demons with a human mindset, they are naturally endowed with extremely powerful abilities. Most of them have the ability to annihilate magic. And live almost twice as long as normal people. However, this lifespan refers to the time when the Nephilim retain their human mind. And to Nephilim, whose lifespan comes to an end, cannot control their power. So they are possessed by madness. They become a living scourge. The Nephilim have only one way to keep their sanity, and that is to share their power with a great magician by making a contract with him. Now Catherine knew why the man had been harassing her and talking nonsense. She also understood the reaction of those cardinals who had mistaken her for a Nephilim. That guy said that there were also many talented wizards among them, and she could just choose anyone to her taste and color. The girl asked, "Does he really think any of them will be able to withstand her power?" She said that rather than make a contract with them, she'd rather make one with that nice lady. And at that moment, she looked at Catherine. Catherine said that she was not a wizard, and she had no desire to make a contract with her. The girl asked why, and maybe there was something about her she didn't like. She better not be the movie that all wizards covet. She asked, only to see that Giovanni's boyfriend had come all the way just to catch her. Catherine thought that she seemed to have heard Giovanni's name somewhere before. But when the girl looked to the side, where the man had been before, he was no longer there. The sorceress then said that's why she didn't want to sign a contract with him, because he didn't inspire any confidence in her. She asked Catherine, "How about we think about her offer again? She may look unkind in her eyes because she's been hiding in bed all this time, but she could actually be of great use. There are many high-ranking persons on this ship with whom she is very close. More than 20 faces come to her at once. A fortune she has also settled with considerable, and it will all belong to Catherine." Catherine thought that she apparently didn't want to hear the words of others. But she can't tell them that she's already made a pact with the original demon Cesare. So the girl didn't know how to refuse her. Catherine whispered softly, telling Cesare to help her, and in the same second she began to stand behind his back. Cesare said that he was looking for her to offer to have lunch with her. He then moved closer to the sorceress, and said there was no way he expected to see some masterless Nephilim talking Catherine's teeth in. He said that apparently she had reached the end of her life cycle, so she climbed into the ship without fear. And at that moment, Catherine heard the noise of the crowd. She realized that the spell that had been cast on the exhibition hall had been broken. Devon told Mistress not to get into an argument with that strange man, and they would just leave. When he said that, he saw Cesare standing next to Mistress. After he asked when Cesare had time to arrive, Catherine replied that she would explain everything later. But she didn't understand when that mysterious man had managed to disappear. If he had fled when he sensed Cesare's approach, then he was not as simple as he seemed. Cesare asked Catherine how he should proceed. If she wished, she would deal with this Nephilim in no time. Catherine said that she didn't think it was necessary. If he is here, then even if this woman becomes a disaster, there will be no problem. Cesare said that a Nephilim who is on the cusp of death doesn't exactly inspire confidence because the man is capable of going to any lengths to survive. Hearing this, Catherine asked, "Maybe it's really best to deal with her then?" Cesare said they shared bits of their souls with each other. But that didn't mean she had to get his permission. But only can afford to give advice on this or that. But the decision-making is entirely left to her, he added. But Cesare said she'd better watch out for the man who'd been here a moment ago. Because the only thing scarier than death is not unquestioning faith in one's beliefs. When the stranger came on deck, he was glad, for he had almost gotten into trouble. He had no idea that the famous Archduke would appear in person. The sorceress thanked the lady because thanks to her she was out. She had already thought that at the snap of the Archduke's finger she would end her life before she could even make a sound. She will say nothing more about the contract to repay her kindness. She will protect her right up until the end of the trip. But Devon said he was her bodyguard. To which the woman replied that he couldn't even resist her magic. And how could he even call himself a bodyguard? If she had only wanted to, she could have calmly slit his mistress's throat while he, a boy, stood disarmed by a spell like a block of stone, the woman added. Catherine thought that although there had been a bit of a stir, she had been able to buy that bed, so it felt as good as it could. The girl asked, "Since when is Lydia dating the Archduke? I have not yet heard that he has a lover. I guess the news hasn't hit the papers yet." The girl said that when he said with such a gorgeous face that they shared pieces of their souls with each other, it sounded so romantic. At that moment Catherine thought that she could not say that Cesare was the devil, and that they were bound to him by contract. That secret would go to the grave with her. The woman said that contrary to popular belief, the Archduke must be a very sentimental man. Catherine asked, "What is the public opinion?" "Archduke Cesare, the current emperor of Sagvid, is the second gift of heaven to the Iteran Empire. For archmages of such a level as they are, it is possible to be born blood relatives in the same country, in the same era," the woman replied. "For archmages of such a level as they are, it is possible to be born blood relatives in the same country, in the same era. The Archduke in particular is literally a god among mages," she continued. Catherine thought that when she listened to the story about him, she got the feeling that God, not man, was in front of her. Well, as Catherine pulled out a tissue to wipe her tears, out fell a ticket to Busterfield, Commander Giovanni Busterfield's dream. Basperfield is an armed group that fights for the humanity and freedom of the Nephilim. As criminals who do not belong to any country, they would not even spare their own lives for their beliefs. It's the same name every man alive today knows. And that bully turned out to be none other than Copperfield's commanding officer, Giovanni. Seeing this invitation, Catherine asked the girl if she knew the man named Giovanni well. She replied that she should not take any interest in that rascal. Despite having a smarmy face, he's crazy and doesn't hesitate to kill for his own ends. If he pretends to know her, just ignore it and get the hell away from her. Catherine thought she would put it aside to start with, and show it to Cesare later, and ask him what she should do. Come to think of it, she would have her first magic class with him today, after all. Catherine wondered what he would look like that night. When it was finally time for bed, she found herself back in his dream. Cesare swam up to her and asked, "Is he Morena today?" Cesare said it was all because yesterday's dolphins ran away. Catherine asked, "Can anyone really escape him?" Cesare said that during today's class, they would find out what the root of her mana was. So he asked her to swim after him. In magic, the root is the most basic classification of scales. Simply put, it is the attribute of a particular magic. Fire, water, wind, lightning, light, darkness. Attributes can be divided into 6 categories. Identifying one's own root was a natural process that all potential wizards went through. Catherine asked if she hadn't already gone through the root discovery process when she was a little girl. People like her, with the ability to annihilate magic, study demonology, and magic with the support of the state. So she had to go through the procedure of identifying the root, whether she wanted to or not. Cesare asked what the result was. The girl said that she had undergone the procedure, but it had never been revealed what attribute she had. The method of testing was to make the flowers bloom by getting magic mana. But the flowers that other children could make bloom in 10 minutes, she couldn't make bloom for a whole year. And it was said that she wasn't just mediocre, but a real disaster. Cesare said it was very strange, because he clearly sees her as having magical abilities, if she was tested as a child by human standards. This was a long time ago, so he said it would be a good idea to have a repeat procedure. So they swam up to the coral, and he said that there was not a drop of mana in it. Let her imagine her mana penetrating inside it. When Catherine heard the terms, she agreed and began the task. After a few minutes, she asked, "Nothing's going on?" Then Cesare said that the first step was considered the most difficult, and suggested a change of approach. He asked how she felt when his lips touched. Catherine thought maybe she should answer that the warmth of his lips almost made her heart jump out of her chest. And then she realized that most likely he needed an objective description. And then she said it felt cold. It felt like my mouth and blood vessels froze, but at the same time it felt hot, like a fire. Cesare said it had been quite some time and her memories were so clear. Then he explained that that was how the mana had filled her body. He told her to remember the feeling and try again. Catherine replied that she didn't know much about what he meant, but she would try. When she tried again, she thought that just as Cesare's mana had entered her body that time, she could now feel the mana filling this coral. And at that moment, the coral stopped glowing and was absorbed into the black energy. When Catherine saw it, she said she felt uneasy, and then she asked if she was sure it had worked. Cesare said she had succeeded, and now he understood why she had failed as a child to make the flowers bloom. He explained that her root of magic was not among the 6 attributes. Catherine then said that meant she had no root of magic, and added that indeed, if she was without talent as a child, where would it come from a few years later? But the man interrupted her and told her that her root was a transitional root that only manifested in demons, not humans. She swam closer to him and asked if by any chance that meant she was actually a demon. Cesare said no way, that she had forgotten the contents of the first chapter of demonology. Demon to demon or man to man can't make a contract. If she were a demon, she wouldn't be able to make a pact with him. But he's puzzled too, since this is the first time he's encountered something like this in thousands of years. He said he thought they'd be very reasonable to teach her magic, just like other people, when it had a completely different root. Then Catherine said that it appeared that she wouldn't be able to start studying today either. She had been looking forward to it all day. Cesare said it was all because she had carelessly used the power of transition, and it was dangerous. So he told her not to get too upset, and stroked her head. He then asked if she knew why the death of a Nephilim was called a calamity. And without waiting for her response, he said it was all because if the Nephilim lost control of his power, everything around him would be destroyed. And to put it mildly, she could end up like that too. At that moment, Catherine thought that it turns out the power of transition is that powerful. And now that Cesare had compared her powers to the scourge of the Nephilim, she could clearly sense how dangerous it was. He took her hand and told her that her root should remain a secret known only to her and him. Then Catherine asked why that was so. Cesare said that there are many weirdos among wizards. For example, to learn the secrets of her unique physique, they could cut her open alive. When Catherine heard that, she said she wouldn't tell anyone about it. That's how they spent their time talking about everything and parted at first light. Catherine was never able to start studying magic. But thanks to her time spent talking to Cesare, she somehow had a feeling that she was going to have a wonderful day today. In the morning, when she went out to do her business, she immediately met an old acquaintance. "I see you're doing well," he said. Suddenly she realized that all that "I'm gonna have a great day" stuff was bullshit. A man touched her hair and said it was goat poop. And she's changed so much that she's unrecognizable. Then Catherine wondered how the hell he recognized her. Pulling back his arm, she said hello to Percival and told him she wasn't particularly happy to see him. So we'd each go our own way. Percival said they even met eyes on the first day. So why did she pretend not to know him? He said he felt disgusted. Catherine, starting to leave, asked if they were in a relationship where they could greet each other with a smile on their lips. Then Percival asked if she had not just greeted him. Katya told him that if she said hello, he would riot, and if she did not, he would also start a scandal, and asked what he would order her to do in that case. A kind face and a radiant atmosphere filled with faith, at the mere sight of him. He asked if someone had said he was going to grab her and eat her. As she left, Catherine thought that Percival's main profession was that of a paladin. He must have a knowledge of magic comparable to that of most wizards. She wondered if he knew anything about a root-like transition. She thought that both Madame Pompadour and all the other people around her were asking her without end. So she sometimes felt that she was suffocating because she was unable to give an answer. But she thought that somehow the promise she had made to Cesare came first, and at that moment she stumbled and began to fall. Percival grabbed her in time and told her to stop squinting in his direction and walk properly. Percival said that she had said herself that she did not like high-heeled shoes, and asked why she wore those shoes then. He said that if she fell like before, she might pass out. But Catherine interrupted him and asked what he wanted from her. She wondered why he was following her at all. It's not like he's going to offer her a cup of coffee with him, and he's acting completely unnatural. Percival laughed and said that even as crazy as he was, he had lost his mind completely, and he asked what good it would do to pursue her. But Catherine didn't listen to him. Darkness shrouded everything around her. It had been light only a moment ago, and she could see some dust. She looked up at the sky and saw a red magic circle similar to the one she had seen in the basement of the mansion. Percival began to run away with her, and she asked what was wrong with him and where he was going. The man said that if she didn't want to end up in a coffin, let me shut up and follow him. He told her to start by holding on to him like a leech. By now the paladins must have given chase. As they ran, Catherine thought that Percival must have seen the red dust and the magic circle too. At that moment, an enchantress peeked out of her bag and asked, "Archduke or paladin, lilies, on whom did my lady's choice fall?" The cat said that either way, Catherine's fate for life was tied to Cesare. But then suddenly a guy came up behind them. At that moment, Percival took Catherine and held her against his chest. She said she couldn't breathe, but he didn't loosen his grip. The guy said he just came to greet His Highness Prince Zenon, but everyone seems to be busy. He asked what was going on, and at that moment, there was a loud sneeze. Said that if he had met with Zenon, he should know what the situation was. He said that everyone was working hard. Catherine looked at him and thought his clothes and face seemed vaguely familiar, and she remembered it was that disagreeable priest. She told Percival who he was, but the boy didn't know what she was talking about. Yes, she explained, that suspicious man right before boarding Liliet had scared her that this would be her last trip, and he was clearly hiding something. The priest said that there had been some misunderstanding. Percival interrupted him and said that all wizards were people driven by interest, so they could not hide their work and always flaunted it. When the priest wanted to say what his words meant, Percival went up to him and slammed his face against the floor. Percival asked if he should still punch him or just burn him to the ground. Then the priest shouted that it was His Highness Prince Janin, and that he had so ordered it. She said it was a lie, and asked why the Prince of the Holy Kingdom would do such a thing. Percival told the priest to stop lying and answer properly. The guy said it was true. He said that the summoning of the original demon was essential for their great cause. Original demons are great beings that can change the balance of the world. Common features were observed between the different hypotheses. There are hundreds of theories on how to summon them, but what is known for certain is that a so-called sacrifice is required, and the sacrifice in such a case is usually human. In other words, Lilith is the altar to summon the original demon, and the passengers are his sacrifice. Catherine told Percival that Prince Janin was his older brother. She asked him if that was true, and if he had any idea what was going on here. To this, Percival said that was the question he wanted to ask. In any case, if this idiot is telling the truth, we must find his brother immediately. He told her to follow him urgently so he could protect her. As they went, a woman came out of the bag and said that instead of going to Prince Janon's quarters, shouldn't they find the Archduke first? She asked if there wasn't some way to summon him, like a ludowave signal. There's always that kind of connection between lovers. She told the lady, Catherine, to concentrate because those who are bound by love can sense what is happening to their soulmate even from a distance. She said he might be the first to find her, but it was hard for her to answer for sure. Percival said that if this was about Archduke Cesare, he had probably already noticed the situation. But he turned to Catherine and asked what all this talk of lovers was about. The woman said that jealousy was so funny. Catherine said that she understood his feelings, but it was not the right time for such conversations. After a while, she said that they had arrived and that they should go into the cabin already. When they entered the cabin, they saw that the lights were off and no one was there. They realized that they were too late. Catherine asked Madame, a woman, how they should be now, and she asked Percival if there was no other place besides the cabin where Prince Janin could be. But when no one answered her, she noticed that she stood alone on the doorstep. Catherine didn't understand where everyone had gone or what was going on. Catherine noticed that the darkness continued around her. Suddenly she saw silhouettes appear in front of her. "A daughter can't match Orland's qualities," the man said, pouring the wine. The woman asked what he meant. He said that one of her magic annihilation abilities was enough to consider her a successful creation, and that fact made him regret it even more. The man asked how a child born with such luck could have no talent for magic at all. The girl said it was true. "To us the resemblance to her mother, the ingenious sorceress, is only her face," said the woman. How disappointed Madame Orléans must be. Catherine realized that this was her memory from her childhood after all. The mental wounds that she thought had long since healed still hurt. Suddenly she heard a familiar voice telling her not to listen to such idiots. Catherine turned and the silhouettes scattered. Now in front of her she saw her mom and herself as a child. Her mom said that because of everything she'd ever done, Catherine was her best creation. Little Catherine said that it was true that she had no talent for magic. Her mother said that if you only believe what the other eyes see, it's impossible to reach higher achievements. She said that Catherine should look beyond the others. The girl didn't realize if it was all just a dream or a hallucination, why she was seeing such memories in front of her as well. And at that moment, it too dissipated. Now her father appeared in front of her and told her that that woman was a monster. She had no feeling called love. He said it meant that, and Catherine, him, their family were just tools for her family game. Catherine didn't realize when that day was. Her father turned around and said that he would not ask her to be like him, but told her to not become like her mother in any way. All she needed was freedom. He said that Catherine could do nothing if she was only attached to her mother. But the girl did not realize when she heard these words from her father. What better time to go to the Fani family and go there, thought Catherine. But then suddenly she saw someone's hand instead of a memory. Cesare came up to her, covering his eyes with his hand, and apologized, saying he was a little late. He asked if they could go back. Catherine looked at his smile and agreed, smiling back. When Catherine opened her eyes, she realized that they were now in the mansion. Cesare told her to take a cup of peppermint tea. The girl thanked him and said that the place was very similar to Christopher's residence. She asked if they had returned to the mansion with magic. Cesare said they were still in the realm of Morpheus, but in order to protect consciousness, he had moved them to a place more familiar to her. Cesare asked if she had seen the red dust that was over the ship. He said it was a very simple dream spell, similar to the one that allowed them to meet in the deep sea of memories, but it was much weaker. People inhale the red dust, suddenly fall asleep, and have a dream that the caster shows them. Under the spell, they immediately lose their life force, not knowing if it's all happening in reality or in a dream. Catherine said she also had the ability to annihilate magic, but asked if the sleep spell could work on her as well. Cesare said that the ability to nullify magic is not insufficient to defend against any enchantments. He said let's say she blocks that door with her power. If someone stronger than her tried to break down the door, it would easily open. Simply put, if the caster is stronger than Catherine, the barrier to magic annihilation will be broken. That's why she shouldn't neglect training even if she has the ability to annihilate magic. Catherine said she understood. After a short silence, she said that he was right, and even if she had no talent for magic, she would not give up, but would make every effort to be able to defend herself with her own strength even in his absence. Cesare said she had a great attitude, actually, which was to be expected from his contractor. Then he asked why she shouldn't learn how to summon demons. Catherine said she'd love to do it, and asked if it was difficult. Cesare said it wasn't hard, it just took about 5 years of practice. When the girl heard that, she was upset. Cesare explained that the summoning of a contracted demon was like ringing a bell. So if the summoned man had ears, he would be able to react instantly. But summoning a demon that wasn't contracted was like dragging a man who was plugging his ears by force. The power mentioned in this context is nothing but mana. Catherine said that in the end that meant that only a wizard who had a contract with a demon and had mana could summon other demons. Cesare confirmed. The girl mentioned a well-known theory, but she still can't grasp the point. What if something dangerous happens during those 5 years while she is mastering demon summoning? The man said that she just doesn't need to go to dangerous places and practice quietly with Christopher. Catherine showed him the invitation and said she had been handed this. She asked him if he remembered his first meeting with Madame Pompadour. She had gotten that envelope that day from that suspicious man who was there, and decided to be sure to show it to Cesare. After reading this invitation, the man thought that now every problem he could think of was upon him.